Number 10. White Rabbit. White Rabbit is Lorena Dodson, and while she might seem like kind of a joke villain, we've seen some pretty dark storylines featuring her in the past few years. White Rabbit is out currently to prove that she's one of the baddest bads around and earn acclaim and recognition for her misdeeds. In the Absolute Carnage one-shot symbiote Spider-Man, we get to see White Rabbit featured in a much darker tale when she runs into a judge who at one point came into contact with the Venom symbiote. She ends up getting on his bad side, and in order to get back at him for what she believes was an unfair trial, she comes after him and his son, confronting them with a gun. It turns out the weapon is a joke gun which shoots out a little flag that says "bang," but the shock of the whole event triggers a heart attack in the judge's son, Dan, who dies as a result, because he's kinda got a weak heart. White Rabbit is arrested but escapes at her trial, being busted out by a large mech-like rabbit. She torments the judge as she leaves, who attempts to break into the courtroom to kill her, but accidentally shoots an innocent court stenographer instead. Lorena might have shown remorse here, but the fact that she messed with this man's life so intensely and then later was absolved of guilt by him killing an innocent man shows just how twisted and cold she can really be. Plus, she has all the money and all that tech to torment her foes with, so there's also that. Is White Rabbit like the Batman of villains in Marvel? That's the question. Number 9. Sin Eater. Sin Eater has definitely been an up-and-comer in the Spider-Man comics lately. He was in league with newish villain Kindred and was working to eradicate sin out in the world. Kindred was actually the one to bring Sin Eater back to life after he died previously in the comics, being a villain who actually goes all the way back to the 80s in terms of his first appearance. First appearing in Peter Parker The Spectacular Spider-Man issue 107. After being resurrected by Kindred, Sin Eater, aka Stanley Carter, could absorb the powers of the villains whose sins he cleansed, making him immensely powerful. However, despite being crazy capable in terms of what he could do and his power set, Carter was defeated with logic when he was made to question his own actions and his philosophies, learning that he himself had been manipulated. As a result, he took himself out of the picture, taking his own life. Still, Sin Eater has died and returned before, and it could very well happen again in the future. Which honestly, I feel like I'd like, because I feel like Sin Eater, he was really cool. Now he's gone. Sad. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving the Spider-Man comics as much as we are loving the Spider-Man comics, and you're also excited for what's coming after, I know I am, be sure to show that by giving this video a thumbs up. We're gonna have so much Spider-Man soon, it's gonna be crazy. I'm so here for it. Number 8. Scorpion. Scorpion not only has made an appearance on the big screen, but is currently running with the Savage Six in the comics. Scorpion is Matt Gargan, a villain who in recent years had been painted as pretty terrifying. Remember during Dark Reign when he was Norman Osborn's Spider-Man, running around wearing the Venom symbiote and eating people? Yeah, that was a thing that happened. Matt Gargan has proven multiple times how intimidating and strong he can be, and he still remains someone to be feared even as he returns to his more classic look, power set, and mantle. Number 7. Mr. Negative. Mr. Negative is back, baby! Initially, he was cleansed of all his sins by Sin Eater, as his Martin Lee persona wanted to be fully free of Mr. Negative, his darker or negative half. However, after Sin Eater's cleansings were undone, Mr. Negative returned and attempted to take over Martin Lee once more. After calling on the inner demons who threatened to harm Aunt May in Lee's presence, he surrendered himself and became Mr. Negative once again. Kingpin, it seems, has allied himself with Mr. Negative and has also returned his former territories of NYC to him to rule over. Number 6. Mysterio. Mysterio is a villain who recently got a boost when he made his way to the big screen, played by Jake Gyllenhaal. There he was Quentin Beck, a man who used to work for Tony Stark creating tech, but after being humiliated by him, he set out to rewrite his story and make himself a hero. To do this, however, he would need to face some pretty big monsters and would need access to some pretty massive amounts of tech to pull off the illusion of him doing so. He tricked Peter Parker and ultimately Talos and his partner, who were disguised as Nick Fury and Maria Hill respectively, and were actually working for the real Fury, and ended up gaining access to a network of Stark drones and satellites the world over, which Tony Stark had bequeathed control of to Peter Parker originally after his death. Even after he was defeated in Far From Home, Mysterio still managed to come out on top in the end when he somehow, from beyond the grave, leaked Spider-Man's true identity to the world. I really don't believe he's dead. And also made Spider-Man look like a complete villain who had killed the heroic Mysterio. In the comics, Mysterio seemingly perishes only to return once more, claiming to be actually good this time, but of course, it's Mysterio, so he can never really be trusted, can he? And if you want to check out that whole thing, you should go check out Sinister War issue number 1. Number 5. Vulture. The Vulture is another villain who also got a pretty big boost from making his way to the big screen in the first Spider-Man MCU film, Homecoming. In this movie, he's played by Michael Keaton, who absolutely delivered when it came to his version of Adrian Toomes, a down-on-his-luck salvage company owner who, after losing a major contract, is forced to turn to a life of crime to provide for his family. I actually really loved this version of Vulture, it was so good. Vulture then maybe gets a little carried away with that whole side hustle, becoming, you guessed it, a supervillain. Not only is Adrian still out there in the world and still a great threat to Peter as he actually knows his secret identity, but it's also been implied in the Morbius trailers that he might have found his way out of prison. In the comics, Vulture is currently leading the Savage Six, one of the multiple Sinister Six teams headed Spider-Man's way. Or at least in Spider-Man's vicinity. All these Sinister Sixes have their own motives, but they're all going to be at least fighting around Spider-Man, I think. Spider-Man's definitely going to be there and be like, oh, I don't want to deal with this. Number 4. Norman Osborn. Green Goblin, Red Goblin, Goblin King, or just Norman Osborn. Whatever name he's going by at the time, Norman Osborn still remains one of the most powerful Spider-Man villains that we've ever seen. Remember when he threatened not just Peter Parker, but pretty much all the heroes and civilians of Earth during Dark Reign, when he became the head of a new organization he'd created to replace S.H.I.E.L.D., Hammer? Not to mention, he also became the Iron Patriot, aka the Iron Man stand-in of his own Dark Avengers team. Of course, lately he's been taking a bit of a back seat as he's more focused on working to help his son Harry Osborn, who is currently taking over the reins in Spider-Man as one of the main big bads currently. Well, kind of. It's complicated. Still, you can't deny the years of history between Norman and Peter and how much Norman Osborn has tried to drive Spider-Man insane. And so for that fact, we still gotta put him, I think, pretty high up on the list. Because you can't erase that history. Number 3. Lizard. Lizard is back to shed levels of scary currently in the comics as we gear up for Sinister War. In order to get the villain back on the Sinister Six team, he had his reptile half separated completely from Curt Connors, meaning that he's full animal instincts and is out for blood. Definitely a deadly loose cannon you want to keep your eyes on. Especially considering in the past, it's usually been Doc Connors' presence within that beast that has allowed Spider-Man to defeat the villain, usually finding a way to appeal to his humanity. But with his humanity stripped away, Lizard is being set up to become more deadly than ever. And I am here for it. It's Lizard's turn, baby. Number 2. Kindred. Kindred for a while was one of the biggest and most mysterious baddies that Spider-Man was up against in his own series. We didn't really know who Kindred was for a long time, or what his deal was, other than he knew Peter very well, and also seemed to bear a long-time grudge against both him and villain Norman Osborn. He also seemed to have a soft spot for Mary Jane. This would all make a lot more sense when Kindred was revealed to be Harry Osborn. As Kindred, Harry is now kind of part demon, and is likely in league with another big bad from hell. Although the other side to that is that Harry is also kind of trapped in a cell, so there's a lot going on here. There's still a lot to unpack with Kindred in terms of the mysteries. Kindred has centipedes that he can use to control others and influence them. He can also manipulate people's dreams, teleport, appears to be invulnerable, and can resurrect the dead. All in all, he's a pretty intimidating villain, with or without the mystery that once surrounded him, and still kinda does surround him. Number 1. Mephisto. Mephisto has proven to be another key player not just in Peter Parker's life as his antagonist, but also just in the Spider-Verse in general. He's also gotten involved in messing with the lives of Miles Morales, Spider-Gwen aka Ghost Spider as we know her now, and even Superior Spider-Man aka Doc Ock. Mephisto, it seems, is going to be coming back with even more surprises for Peter.
Number 10. Death Urge. Similar to how the DC Universe has the Black Flash acting as messenger of death, Marvel decided to dip their toes into that realm as well, and out came Death Urge, a wraith-like superhuman entity with the ability to fly at some ridiculous speeds, turn intangible, and of course, pull various weapons like spears and swords out of their body. When these weapons strike Death Urge's targets, they immediately die with a blackness spreading from the spot where the weapon struck and passed through the target's body. If the weapon happens to pass through someone other than Death Urge's target, that person only feels a numbing coldness but will not actually blacken or die. Death Urge's only targets are apparently only those who have craved death and oblivion to some degree, so I guess I better be on the lookout. Not a whole lot is known about Death Urge besides the fact that he once served Oblivion and had a very close relationship with Craig Hollis. In Hollis' earlier life, Death Urge acted as both a guardian angel and a bad influence for him, goading him into dangerous situations in an attempt to awaken him to his own immortality. However, this relationship was damaged beyond repair when Hollis' girlfriend killed herself and Death Urge arrived to collect her soul, with Hollis believing that Death Urge had goaded Terry to commit suicide and from then on viewed him as a tormentor. He has been seen up against not only the Avengers but the Fantastic Four as well, and each time he has caused some serious trouble, so it's kinda weird that he hasn't had too many appearances.
Number 9. Mole Man. Mole Man originally appeared in Fantastic Four issue number 1, but has become a villain to not just the FF over time, but the Avengers as well. In fact, despite not being one of the strongest villains around, the Avengers even at one point had to team up with the FF to defeat Mole Man, who had kidnapped Sue Storm. Mole Man became a villain because he felt that society had rejected him. He aimed to take revenge on the world for this. Mole Man has taken on more than one Avengers team as well, even having beef with not officially sanctioned West Coast Avengers, believing the team had attacked his home of Subterranea located beneath Monster Island. He is also tangled with Tony Stark's Mighty Avengers as well.
Number 8. Starstalker. Varanus aka Starstalker is a dragon-like alien monster from the planet Vormir. By wrapping himself in a cocoon, he was able to transform himself into a larger, more powerful form known as his ionic combustion form. In this form, Varanus was able to absorb the ions of anything around him, allowing him to drain the energy of enemies such as Thor or even shorting out Iron Man's armor. But that's not all, because he frequently used this power to gorge himself on entire planets, destroying them in the process. After attacking and defeating Krull, this monster caught the attention of the Avengers, and although he was able to hide from them for a short period of time, Mantis was eventually able to find him and the fight ensued. Starstalker was able to dispatch the Avengers pretty easily by taunting them with stories of his origins while refusing to reveal his weakness, before spinning himself into another ionic cocoon to boost his power to destroy the Earth. Eventually, Mantis was able to figure out that his weakness was solar energy, and her and Vision used this weakness to just turn him into stone.
Number 7. Red Ghost. The Red Ghost is also a Fantastic Four villain as well. He is a Russian communist who is known for his mad science. He studied and sought to recreate the mutating effects of the cosmic rays, which were responsible for giving the Fantastic Four their powers. As such, Ivan Kragoff built a ceramic ship and went up into space with a team of apes. He and his apes gained powers. Ivan himself gained the ability to appear intangible, hence his name as the Red Ghost. Because, you know, he's a communist and he can be see-through. And he also became the leader of the Super Apes, because they also got powers. Later on, he would team up with Mole Man and ended up fighting the Avengers while they attempted to rescue their kidnapped teammate Giant Man from Mole Man's clutches. He was also thwarted by the Avengers later on when he attempted to rob a bank randomly with his team of Super Apes.
Number 6. Cyclop. No, not Cyclops, Cyclop. Also known as One Eye for, well, obvious reasons, Cyclop was a member of an ancient insect alien race that worshipped the Dark Gods, and because of this, Cyclop was eventually chosen by the Dark Gods to find a power source for them in exchange for his race getting to conquer Earth. He was quickly able to capture the Hulk, however the other members of the Avengers were able to defeat him relatively easily, and this resulted in Cyclop losing the Hulk. Deemed as incompetent, the Dark Gods abandoned him as their agent and he was dumped into the microverse by them, with no way to return to his original size or home world. Still wanting to impress the Dark Gods in any possible way, he devised and executed a plan that turned him into the god of the microverse. He was confronted by the Hulk and Jarella, but managed to hypnotize and enslave the Hulk. However, that didn't last for too long, so out of desperation, Cyclops just accidentally annihilated himself with one of his devices. Poor little evil guy.
Number 5. Triune Understanding. The Triune Understanding was an organization led by Jonathan Tremont. It was originally believed to be an organization focused on maximizing human potential, although it was later revealed to have more sinister motives. Tremont specifically used the organization and its resources to create a smear campaign to be used against the Avengers. He claimed the Avengers were intolerant of various religions and races. He also used his villainous brothers Lord Templar and Pagan in an attack against the Avengers, in which he then blamed the superhero team for all the destruction that the battle had caused. The crazy thing is, although this organization is not one of the well-known Avengers adversaries, the Triune Understanding still succeeded in getting both Thor and Captain America to leave the team for a time.
Number 4. Sons of the Serpent. Now, over the years there have been a total of 7 iterations of the Sons of the Serpent, so let's make our way through all of them, shall we? This group was initially formed by General Chen, and let's just say they were all about doing some pretty awful things against non-natives of their country. The original group was disbanded by S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Avengers after they unmasked General Chen as their leader. And then the second group didn't show up until a little bit while later, but they were also quickly defeated and disbanded by the Avengers and Black Panther. Financed by J.C. Pennyworth, the third iteration was all about destroying buildings in Harlem, but the Defenders had no trouble stopping them. Head over to LA after and you'd find the fourth iteration selling drugs and weapons under the leadership of the Hate Monger. Thankfully, War Machine shut them down for good and cut off all of their suppliers as well. The fifth iteration was super into magic and mysticism and led by Serpent Man himself, however it's actually unknown if they were ever stopped, so honestly they could be practicing to this very day. The six Sons of the Serpent controlled New York's justice system for a period of time, and they would have been a much bigger threat had they not been stopped by Daredevil. And then finally, the seventh iteration of the team went back to their roots and were patrolling the American border, not letting anyone into the country unless they were a citizen. Not only that though, they were also sending some of these immigrants to Carl Malice as test subjects. Thankfully though, Captain America caught wind of this and their villainous ways were put to an end.
Number 3, Chaos King. It's kind of unfortunate what happened to the Chaos King. He actually seemed like a pretty neat villain in theory. The event that he is primarily known for is the Chaos War. Unfortunately, Chaos War took place right before the Epic Fear itself in terms of Marvel chronological print history, and kind of became overshadowed by it. Ultimately, it also felt a lot less planned out. The Chaos King, also known as Matsu Mikoboshi, is a cosmic entity and basically Japanese god who met his end during the events of Chaos War, where he was defeated. During Chaos War, the Chaos King used his powers to reverse the effects of life and death, meaning the dead heroes came back to life, while those who had been alive were now deceased instead. As a Japanese kami, he has godlike powers, making him insanely durable and strong, while also having supernatural abilities as well. The Chaos King's powers were more dark in origin though, when it came to their magic type.
Number 2, the Circus of Crime. Now much like the Sons of the Serpent, the Circus of Crime has gone through many iterations, but let's just focus on the modern eras this time. Currently composed of the Ringmaster aka Maynard Tybalt, Bruto the Strongman, Clown, Tina the Fat Lady, and the Fire Eater, the Circus of Crime is kind of exactly what you'd expect after hearing their name. A circus that does crime. They followed a general formula while committing their crimes. They would give a performance before a large audience, then at some point, the Ringmaster would use the powerful mind control device concealed in his hat to put the audience into a trance. The circus members would then rob the audience, who wouldn't remember anything about the thefts when the Ringmaster released them from the trance, and then the performance would just continue. They clashed with superheroes on a pretty regular basis, the most notable being the Hulk, Spider-Man, and of course the Avengers. Funnily enough though, one time Matt Murdock himself offered to defend them in court after having helped defeat them alongside Spider-Man. Crazy.
Number 1, Wrecking Crew. The Wrecking Crew is a villainous entourage who appear as blue-collar sort of construction workers. In reality, they are Dirk Garthwaite, who was originally Wrecker, and his team comprised of Thunderbell, aka Elliot Franklin, previously a physicist, Bulldozer, previously a military sergeant known as Henry Camp, Pile Driver, aka Brian Kaluski, who used to be a farmer. They received their powers when they all came into contact with the crowbar as it was struck by some kind of magical lightning. They have attempted to take hold of the Avengers Mansion on more than one occasion, teaming up with the Masters of Evil during one of their attempts and kidnapping Misty Knight and using her to control Iron Fist another time. They are usually handily defeated by the Avengers when they go up against the team, however. It seems that magical construction equipment and mystical abilities, which are tied to that equipment, is not really enough to defeat the Avengers, I guess. Number 10, Electro. Electro, even in his first appearance in issue 9 of the original Amazing Spider-Man series, was beating Spider-Man. At least, initially. When Spider-Man first meets Electro, he doesn't know what to do, and Electro gets away a few times before Spider-Man manages to stop him. At one point, Spider-Man even reaches out to try and grab Electro. Not a great idea. While Electro is in his electric shock condition, his words, not mine, it turns out touching him is deadly. Spider-Man survives the great electric shock he is given, but is forced to modify his costume in order to take on Electro in the future. He adds on rubber slippers and gloves, and likely in the future would make modifications to his costume, adding in rubber insulation in case he came up against the villain again, which he would many times. Because yeah, that's only issue 9. It goes on for a lot longer than issue 9. Number 9, Mephisto. Mephisto might not win in the most obvious ways, but he definitely is always sneakily on the up and up when it comes to him versus heroes. Any heroes really, Spider-Man included. In the case of Mephisto versus Spider-Man, that sounded more legal than I intended, but I guess we are dealing with binding contracts. Mephisto ended up helping Peter to get what he needed, but at a price. He required in exchange Peter's marriage to MJ, which for comic book continuity meant undoing that rocky but ongoing union. Spider-Man got what he wanted. Aunt May was safe and his identity was a secret once more, but I don't think he really realized what he was giving up until he experienced it. MJ didn't even seem to recall their marriage, although lately it seems to be implied that she might have known more about their past than she's let on. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you love it when I talk about villains, I love talking about villains, then be sure to show that love by giving this video a thumbs up. It really does help us out here. I'm not just saying that. They don't just pay me to say that. This is the truth. Number 8, Chameleon. In his first appearance, Chameleon left Spider-Man running away in tears, ruining the day he ever became Spider-Man. Chameleon may have been apprehended in the end of issue number 1 of Amazing Spider-Man, but somehow it still felt as though he came out on top. Dang it, because Chameleon, he's a villain, so he shouldn't win. Although I am kind of rooting for him sometimes. During their conflict, Chameleon attempted to make it seem as though Spider-Man was up to no good, impersonating him while committing acts of thievery and fleeing from the police. Oh no! Even once Spider-Man managed to catch him, it still seemed as though Chameleon might get away. Fortunately, Spider-Man had his spider sense to let him know something was up. He managed to get away from Chameleon, but it was only because Chameleon's disguise had become damaged in the fray that the villain was caught at all. So Spider-Man didn't even really win that day. It was more just like Chameleon made a mistake. And it was like, dang it. Now it's revealed who I am because you can see the Spider-Man suit underneath and I was impersonating Spider-Man. How embarrassing. Number 7, Morlun. Not only has Morlun proven himself to be a formidable foe in various storylines, with him taking on all of the Spider-Verse twice in the Spider-Verse event and Spider-Geddon in the comics, in addition to taking out multiple Spider-Folks / Spider Totems along the way, but he also went toe-to-toe with Spider-Man in The Other. The worst thing / I guess best thing for Morlun fans about this story is how Morlun doesn't just ever go for the 1-2 knockout. Morlun seems to prefer drawing out his victory, teasing his victim if you will, and enjoying Spider-Man's suffering. It's probably because Morlun's used to winning so much. He's used to devouring Spider Totems, so he's like, we'll just let this play out. At one point, Morlun devours Spider-Man's eye in a fight and beats him to within an inch of his life. However, while this definitely feels like a victorious moment for Morlun and Spider-Man was beat here, he would eventually recover, meaning that Morlun didn't get a straight victory over Spider-Man. In fact, he'd even heal his eye back. But of course, villainous victories rarely ever get to be permanent, so I think we still need to count this one. Number 6, the Lizard. While Lizard doesn't do anything crazy like succeed in completely killing Spider-Man or anything like that, he does beat him in the race against time to save his friend, Dr. Kurt Connors, who, is also the Lizard. In the story Shed, the Lizard ends up taking over before Spider-Man can get there to try and stop it. Spider-Man arrives far too late as the Lizard seems to have permanently gained dominance after devouring Kurt Connors' son against his own will. This victory would be one that would not only haunt Spider-Man but the Doctor as well. He would end up finding a way to cure himself of his lizard brain but become stuck in his lizard form, kept in a containment cell for his crimes, but unable to bring himself to reveal Spider-Man that he had finally cured himself mentally of his reptilian half. This whole thing is just a super big Lizard win in my mind, because even when Connors frees himself of the Lizard, he's still stuck in the lizard form, and he still is I feel too guilty to even be able to tell people what's really going on. So the Lizard really won, even though he was gone. Number 5, Mysterio. Mysterio recently got a pretty big win in the MCU, in typical Mysterio style, I must say. While he hasn't been doing too hot in the comics lately, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, in Spider-Man Far From Home, Mysterio managed to earn Spider-Man's trust and even infiltrate S.H.I.E.L.D., making them believe he was a hero from an alternate world. I'm not going to lie, even I personally wanted to believe it. It turned out this was not true, and while his backstory was a little different here, Mysterio here was still a master at illusion and a full-on villain. In the end, Quentin Beck would seemingly die during a confrontation with Spider-Man, but it turns out he had one more trick up his sleeve. And at the end of the film, we see a video recording of Beck that incriminates Spider-Man and also reveals his true identity as Peter Parker. He's gonna be in a lot of trouble in the next movie, I think. Number 4, Kraven. Kraven's Last Hunt is a story that forever sticks out in comic book history. Especially in Spider-Man's history, it is a dark tale where Kraven finally captures his most prized prey, Spider-Man. What's more, it's also implied he kills Spidey. He then proceeds to take Spider-Man's place, proving once and for all that not only is he capable of capturing and killing the hero, but also aiming to prove that he's better than Spider-Man by beating down all his villains brutally. In the end, we learn that Spider-Man was not actually dead, but in a comatose, death-like state all this while. He returns and Kraven acknowledges that while he seemingly won to do what Spider-Man does while keeping to his moral code is actually an impressive feat. Something that Kraven likely wouldn't actually be able to do. His final hunt complete, it's then implied that Kraven takes his own life. Number 3, Kingpin. There are a few times that Kingpin has beaten Spider-Man throughout the comics and alternate universes that we have explored. At one point, he actually manages to kill MJ in a what-if version of Back in Black, and while Spider-Man manages to hunt him down and even kills him, in the end, Kingpin's actions turn Spider-Man into a villain. So I'd still consider that a win for Kingpin. But what I'd really like to focus on here is the time that Kingpin managed to kill Spider-Man in Sony's groundbreaking animated film Into the Spider-Verse, one of my favorite films of all time. Here, Kingpin manages to actually kill Peter Parker, the current Spider-Man of Miles Morales' universe. Although Miles would also learn of alternate universes with their own Spider-Men, Spider-Girls, and even Spider-Pigs. He would also learn of his newfound powers and himself have to protect the city as a new Spider-Man. But still, when it came to the Peter Parker of his reality, Kingpin killed him. He dead. He dead. So dead. Never coming back. Number 2, Dr. Octopus. Doc Ock actually succeeds in taking Spider-Man's place, not just by impersonating him, but by actually swapping bodies with the hero. That the two swap bodies, wah 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 wah, with Peter ending up stuck in the dying form of Doc Ock and Doc Ock's mind now within the young and superpowered body of Spider-Man. Oh my goodness. Eventually, he would relinquish this form, giving it back to Peter when he realized he was incapable of making the tough decisions required of a more heroic spirit. But for a time, we'd come to know this version of villain and hero combined as Superior Spider-Man. And if you're wondering, but wait a minute, didn't Peter die in Doc Ock's body? Yes, but also his consciousness lived still on in his mind. It's a little confusing, but if you read it, it makes sense. It's like comic book confusing, just if you are explaining it quickly to someone in a list. Number 1, Green Goblin. You can take Peter's body, you can take his mind, you can ruin his reputation, but one of the worst things you can ever do to him is to break his heart. There are many ghosts that haunt Peter Parker, but one of the most meaningful ones to this day remains that of Gwen Stacy. Gwen was Peter's childhood sweetheart. Before he and MJ were together and were a thing, he was with Gwen, who was also a science enthusiast and academic like Peter. Gwen ended up being taken hostage by the Green Goblin and thrown from a bridge. When Peter as Spider-Man went to save her with his web shooters, it's implied that his own attempt to do so was what killed her. The tension from his web caused her neck to snap. Norman Osborn has remained one of Spider-Man's most iconic villains to this day, and for many, the moment Green Goblin killed Gwen Stacy was where this shift really happened for his character, making him Spider-Man's greatest and most feared nemesis.
Kicking off the list at number 10, we have Mojo. I'll start this list off with a rather fun one. Not that any villain isn't fun, but when Mojo's involved, it always gets a little too weird in some way. He made his first debut in Longshot issue 3. Mojo is known for using Earth as forms of TV entertainment for the universe. So we're all actors. I'm in your screen right now. I'm actually part of Mojo's universe. I'm not even real. And his power increases the more viewers that he gets for this interdimensional TV show. So if you subscribe and like this video, maybe I'll get more powerful too, who knows? He's part of a race called the Spineless Beings. They're from a planet called Mojo World, of course, inside a pocket dimension called the Mojoverse. So it's all about him, we get it. He messes with the Avengers in a pretty dramatic way as well, especially in Avengers Annual 1. The Avengers of the Supernatural. Wow, there is a title right there. So in this issue, Mojo abducted the Avengers and created another supernatural version of the team. And if that wasn't weird enough, he made them participate in this reality show called Martian Transylvania Superhero Mutant Monster Hunter High School, which is Just a mouthful. Basically, the mutants of the Unity division were goths, the others were football players and cheerleaders, and the Avengers of the Supernatural were nerds. So he likes to play it weird. And before we continue on with this list of Avengers villains, guys, if you want to go ahead and give us more power by giving us a like down there, and if you haven't subscribed already, you might as well click that, and then you can see all our videos pop up. We do all the work for you. We'll just show up in your phone. Number 9, the Leader. Samuel Stearns, aka the Leader, made his first debut in Tales to Astonish issue 62. He was working one night at a chemical research plant, and when he was moving canisters of waste material, one of the canisters broke open, covering him in gamma radiation. God, everybody is so clumsy in comics all the time. Just so many spills. So of course, after the spill, Stearns survived just like Banner did after his gamma accident, but the only difference was it affected him in a much different way. See, he didn't get angrier, he got smarter and smarter. Because now his brain could absorb so much more and more information, it actually got to a point where his physical body started to mutate. So now he has this giant green brain head. His head just keeps getting bigger and bigger. It looks like a gushy balloon, just about to pop any second. Of course he's a villain. Look at his head. I mean, no offense, but come on, I'd be upset too. That's all I'm saying. I'd be pretty upset. He started to refer to himself as the Leader, using his intellect to become a criminal mastermind, and he clashed with the other Gamma guy, Banner. In fact, he actually ruined Betty and Bruce's wedding once. He's kind of a jerk. But he's gone after the Avengers as well. When the Red Hulk gave Stearns Red Gamma treatment to enhance him even more, becoming the Red Leader, he became a member of the Thunderbolts. Number 8, the Mandarin. Ah yes, the first time Marvel told us that the popular enhanced individual was actually an actor all along. The Mandarin. He was in Iron Man 3, kind of. I mean, I'm including him on this list because that version wasn't even close to what he's really like. He made his first appearance in Tales of Suspense issue 50. While exploring the inside of a cave in the Valley of the Spirits, he found an alien ship and a passenger still in there as well, named Axon Carr. But while he was there, he also saw 10 rings, these powerful rings, each representing a new power. So he took them, because he's a villain. Then after finishing off the alien pilot, he began to study these rings and he began mastering them as well. So if he wears them all at once, his mind will be reached by the spirits trapped within the rings. Yeah, he's a pretty sick villain. And then in Iron Man 3, his name's Trevor and he just crushes beer. Number 7, Grim Reaper. This next one we thought we were going to see in WandaVision, but we thought wrong. We thought maybe if it wasn't Mephisto, it's probably Grim Reaper, but we were wrong on both. The Grim Reaper did not show up, but his silhouette did for a hot second, maybe. Eric Williams made his debut back in Avengers issue 52. He's the brother of Simon Williams, aka Wonder Man. He was considered a black sheep of the family, and when he was younger, he accidentally burnt down his house after, you guessed it, being clumsy with chemicals. The usual. So his brother felt responsible for not stopping him or being there for him when watching him. So after that, he began to watch him closely, a little bit too close, because Eric then became rebellious because of the supervision, and then soon he ended up with the Magia in Las Vegas while his brother stayed and took over the family business. So with the business failing, no thanks to Stark being the top dog in innovation, he turns to his brother for some mob help to get things going again. So Simon embezzled money with Eric, but Simon got caught and thrown into the slammer. Went thrown right to jail. So Baron Zemo approached him, asked for help to take out the Avengers, and revenge on Stark was included, so he was like, sure, this sounds like a pretty sweet gig. So then he got turned into Wonder Man, but he ended up saving the Avengers from Zemo's trap. He turned, he went good guy. But his brother, Eric, he heard of Simon's untimely departure, so he got angry and felt tremendous guilt after this. So he contacted the Tinkerer, who gave him a scythe. Then he took on the name of Grim Reaper, and voila, we now have a pretty badass villain. Number 6, Enchantress, aka Amora. She made her first debut in Journey into Mystery issue 103, and she has a love-hate relationship with Thor. And I'm not gonna lie, she's got a pretty sweet gig. She's got multiple mansions throughout the 9 realms, and she can make gold and diamonds with her tears. So even if she gets stood up on prom, she's gonna cry a few diamonds, and then she has more bling for the next date. So it's a win-win. She's really good at seducing people as well, like Scourge, for example. She would seduce him into helping her with her evil plans. But Amora wouldn't follow through with her side of the deal. She would just play hard to get, and she would mess with his mind and his heart. Now in the comics, she was sent by Odin to take out Jane Foster, but when she tried to attack Jane, of course, her love Thor intervened, and that's when she was banished to Earth by Odin. And then her next logical step as a villain is to join the Masters of Evil and get in line for taking down Thor or any of his annoying super teammates. Her tool is seduction, just one kiss, and that's all it takes to make you fall under her control. She doesn't have too much experience with hand-to-hand combat because she doesn't really need it. She just gets other dudes to fight her battles for her. What a boss. Number 5, Kang. This guy we can actually look forward to knowing more about soon, as he's confirmed for the next Ant-Man sequel with actor Jonathan Majors set to play him. But just who is Kang the Conqueror? Why is this a big deal for the Avengers? Well, he made his first appearance in Avengers issue 8 back in 1964, and Kang has seen many centuries. His powers allow him to travel through time, and his futuristic suit of armor is built with weapons that can take on beings from any of those timelines. He's super smart and of course travels with armies, with each warrior equipped with the same armor and weaponry, so the fights aren't exactly easy by any means. The time travel stuff also doesn't come without consequence either. See, as Kang travels more and more through time, he creates time-displaced duplicates, and with the cosmic multiversal route that Marvel's going with now in the MCU, and especially with Loki's show, we could probably look forward to some more mind-bending battles. Number 4, Taskmaster. Taskmaster made his first comic book debut in Avengers 195. Anthony Masters is a former S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, of course, who turned into a mercenary and assassin. Although he is one guy, he has this ability where he can copy your every move. So he can replicate your physical skills. He has photographic reflexes, so he can watch Black Widow take down an evil henchman, and bam, he's got it locked into his brain. He knows how to do the same type of combat as well. He's actually the villain of the Black Widow movie, but that has yet to come out due to COVID delays, so the general public doesn't really know how cool this guy is yet. He became a teacher based out of the Taskmaster's Academy to train villains and agents, one of those agents being US agent John Walker, who is currently turning heads for all the wrong reasons in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Now in the comics, it was actually Taskmaster who taught Walker how to throw Cap's shield so well. In Avengers issue 196, he was able to capture Yellow Jacket, the Wasp, and Ant-Man, and then when the rest of the team showed up, he took them on as well, only being defeated because he could not predict the movements of the robot Jocasta. Otherwise, it's a tough battle, this one for sure. Number 3, Mephisto. While on the topic of characters that we wanted to see in the MCU, I of course gotta talk about the devil himself. He made his first appearance as a serpent in Bible Tales for Young Folk issue 1, but he made his first full appearance as Mephisto in Silver Surfer issue 3. I don't think I have to explain too much about this guy or why he's a threat. I mean, he's Satan. He's the literal devil of the Marvel Universe. He lives comfortably in hell with lesser demons that serve him. The reason we thought we were gonna get Mephisto in WandaVision goes back to something he did in the comics, which was kind of a big deal. The comic was Avengers West Coast Volume 2, issue 52. We find out the truth behind Scarlet Witch's children, Billy and Tommy, who were in WandaVision. Now it turns out the 5 pieces of Pandemonium's soul were actually Mephisto's. So Mephisto tricked Pandemonium and gathered beings possessing the appropriate fragments, and 2 of those 5 fragments just happened to be children of the Scarlet Witch and the Vision. So when Pandemonium arrived, he took the kids, which in turn gave Mephisto full strength, and this left Scarlet Witch having a breakdown. Mephisto's awesome. His deals are always crazy. Like after the comic Civil War, when everybody knew Spider-Man's identity, Spider-Man had to make a deal with Mephisto in order to save Aunt May because she got shot because he revealed his name to the public. So he's pretty wild. That's just one of many horrible deals. Number 2, MODOK. Making its first appearance in Tales of Suspense issue 93, MODOK was created by Dr. George Tarleton. He had worked with the team recently to create the Cosmic Cube, but the scientist supreme, Lyle Getz, figured the next logical step was figuring out a way to understand the powers inside said cube. So enter Project MODOK. Spelt with a C at the end, not a K, that's important. So MODOK stood for Mental Organism Designed Only for Computing. Sounds like the perfect tool to analyze and probe this cosmic cube. So they grabbed that scientist George that I mentioned and altered him into this big-headed supercomputer. With a brain too big for his body, they had to give him a hover chair, which is referred to as the Doomsday Chair. I mean, he's already a villain. You guys are just kind of making this happen for him. The scientists did not prepare that with great power comes great superiority, so it wasn't long before MODOK overtook his masters, changed that last letter from a C to a K, making his new, more suitable name for the list, MODOK, which stood for Mental Organism Designed Only for Killing. He's the big bad villain in the new Avengers PS4 game, and he's as crazy as it sounds in that game as well. And finally, number 1, Morgan Le Fay. Now, with the Marvel Cinematic Universe leaning into the witch madness for the conclusion of WandaVision, we might actually get to see Morgan Le Fay on the big screen soon enough. She made her first appearance in Black Knight issue 1 back in 1955, and she's been a recurring villain to the Avengers in the comics for a while now. And when the Dark Avengers were formed by Norman Osborn, Morgan was their first enemy to face off against. She's a powerful spellcaster, one of those spells being reality warping by using these Norn stones. So she packs a punch. Elizabeth Hurley actually plays Morgan Le Fay in the show Runaways, and she's great when it comes to these witchy, devilish roles. I mean, she literally played the devil in the movie Bedazzled as well, which is pretty funny. She was made for the role, it seems.
Coming in number 10, we have Shocker. I think back when this villain was created, the idea of having someone who had vibrations as their superpower would have been a little bit harder to make fun of. Now, many of you probably know Shocker. He has had a few moments in the sun, popping up in video games, and he even has a moment as one of the henchmen of the Vulture. Now, you think someone who is canon in the MCU wouldn't fit onto this list, but when we break him down, we start to learn that Shocker isn't that shocking. It would seem that this villain has a knack for losing to Spider-Man every single time, and it's probably because his powers aren't that impressive. He can make shockwaves that blast through the air, and he can make vibration shields. Yeah, I'm not that impressed by what you have to offer. In recent years, we have seen less and less of this punchline of a villain, as I think the writers have seen that his time has come and he will soon be put to bed. As a kid, I always got him and Electro mixed up because I thought Shocker meant that he was electrocuting people because he was shocking them. Well, at least for the new generation, you won't have those problems because this guy is going to be gone pretty soon. Coming in at number 9, we have White Rabbit. I mean, right when we start breaking down this villain, you will learn why she is on this list. It's one thing to be a down and out loser who's had enough of the cruel world and now wants to dive into a world of crime because everything else has let them down. But when you come from a rich family and you turn to crime just for the sake of being angsty, then I don't really have much compassion for you, and your character isn't really relatable. The White Rabbit, also known as Lorena Dodson, built her persona off the Alice in Wonderland book. She thought that would be a cool and edgy way to get into the world of crime. I think she just indulged in too many psychedelics and maybe went off the deep end. I wouldn't be surprised if this character was inspired by the rise of LSD in the 80s when this character was birthed. In terms of powers, she has zero. All she has is a bad attitude and a general understanding of martial arts. She's not a villain that any of us are clamoring for. Coming in at number 8, we have Mindworm. You know, for some of these villains, it seems that the writers went to so much work to really come up with someone who was interesting and had motivations for evil, but then they just throw them in the toilet, and that's what really happens with Mindworm. Mindworm starts off great. He has powers from birth. He's some sort of mutant kid with a huge head. Of course, he's weird and kids don't like him, but at least his parents love his huge cranium. But what Mindworm doesn't know is that he's feeding off the psionic energy of his parents, draining their brain. Eventually, he gets too greedy with this and he kills his own mother and father. He didn't mean to do this. He was just a young mutant kid who didn't know any better, and now he was an orphan. From there, he was bullied in the orphanage and he learns how to use his powers. Eventually, he grows up and is living in a New York apartment where he's feeding off all the people in the building and getting pretty strong off this. But Spider-Man moves in and he senses that someone's trying to suck out his brain energy. The two have a clash and Mindworm is killed by some gang members. Like, all of that work into building up who this guy is, and he was gone just like that. What a waste. Coming in at number 7, we have Gibbon. We got back-to-back orphanage stories for you. In fact, this one sounds like a cross between Mindworm and Robin. Gibbon is basically the missing link. He has all the abilities of a chimp that are amplified way up. He's got super strength, speed, awareness, reflexes. This guy is off the charts when you're talking about his Madden stats. But because of his monkey-like ways, the kids didn't really like him in the orphanage, and he was never adopted. Now, this ended with him growing up and leaving like a regular dude, but now he was just a freak with no money, so he decided he could use his mutations to make some cash. And what's the best way for an oddity to make a quick buck? Well, the circus, of course. There you would think he would be among his people, but he was rejected once again, and now he turned to a life of villainy. When we first see Gibbon, he's just a dude that has some monkey skills, but in later renditions of his character, he looks like a full-on ape man. And even though he has the abilities to take down Spidey, the clashes between the two always end up with Gibbon on his butt. Coming in at number 6, we have The Answer. Now, this guy is actually pretty cool. He's just used in a very lame way, and his name sucks. The Answer was already a skilled assassin. He was working for the mob boss of all mob bosses, Wilson Fisk. Anyone Fisk wanted taken down, he was all over it. And part of why he was so good at his job was because The Answer, at this time he was known as Aaron Nichols, is extremely intelligent. He showcases genius level problem solving skills, and he can come up with the answer to any problem. And this is all before he ever gets any sort of superpowers. There was a time in comics when the Kingpin was just handing out superpowers, but you don't give the first powers to someone you can't trust, so he of course gave his first dose of super juice to his buddy Aaron. But at first glance, nothing happened, which is probably a relief and a bummer, because if you take some sort of experimental drug to give yourself powers, you want to get the superpowers, but you also don't want to come out a freak. But later, The Answer learns that he has one of the most powerful superpowers I have ever heard of. No matter what the situation, when he is faced with a conflict, his body will supply him with the powers to counter who or whatever he's fighting. So normally he's just a guy, but when the time calls for it, he can fly or create force fields or get super strength. But after a run-in with Spidey that he wins, the character just kind of disappears and we don't see him that much. This guy fits on this list because of the wasted potential. Coming in at number 5, we have Kangaroo. I brought this up in the first video. If you're a villain or a hero and you're choosing your power, you don't have to pick something lame. It seems like some of these villains focus way too much on the branding of their super persona rather than the powers. With Kangaroo, it seemed that the villain was set on theming themselves after kangaroos rather than having a cool power. He has implants in his legs that allow him to jump very far, and he's also a skilled boxer. Like, not the worst combination of things, but when you're hell-bent on taking out Spidey by stomping on him, you're probably going to lose a lot. There was this weird time in the 70s and 80s where Australia was this thing that the media was trying to push. It was foreign, it was interesting, no one really knew how to sell it. The closest that we got was Crocodile Dundee. But this villain seems like the big wigs at Marvel wanted to make an Australian themed villain because they thought kids would like it, rather than thinking of a good character first. Coming in at number 4, we have The Swarm. Have you guys seen that episode of South Park where they make a joke that the writers from Family Guy are just manatees in a tank and they all pull out 3 random topics to base an episode around? Well, that's what The Swarm feels like. They were like, German scientists, killer bees, purple cape. This dude is lame, not only because he's a swarm of bees that is being controlled by a dead scientist's consciousness, but also because this dude gets beat by bug repellent. When him and Spidey face off, Spidey's able to beat him by spraying down his suit in bug spray, and then the swarm literally can't get close enough to fight and has to run away. If your weakness can be purchased at Home Depot, then you're a pretty lame villain if you ask me. Coming in at number 3, we have Grizzly. I like how in the Marvel universe, if you're a bear enthusiast, you'll eventually get superpowers and become one of the lamest villains that Peter Parker has to fight on a semi-regular basis. But if you're a bear enthusiast in real life, you just get eaten by bears. 2 very different outcomes. Well, Maxwell Markham was just that, a dude who loves bears, and get this, he was also a wrestler who hurt his fellow wrestlers too much, so he got kicked out of the league. We got a dude who loves bears, he used to be a wrestler. What's the third thing that's going to set this guy into the manatee formula? Oh, he was also given a bear suit that would hook him up with some superpowers. Where did he get this suit? Well, he got it from the Jackal, who's one of Spider-Man's best villains, but that dude has a lot of dud moves. I feel like the Jackal just wakes up some days and is like, what if I gave a dude a bear suit so he thought he was a real villain and then Spider-Man would have to deal with it? That would be jokes. Some of his plots sound more like pranks than actual schemes to cause mayhem. Coming in at number 2, we have Hypno Hustler. Next, we have a villain that not only has a lame weakness, but their powers were used to such a small scale that doesn't really make any sense why this character was ever made. Hypno Hustler is Anthony Del Soen, and he has music that can take over your mind. His songs allow him to control people around him and then they do his bidding. But the thing is, if he hears his own music, he will also become hypnotized. He can't even handle his own groovy music, which seems strange. I've never heard of a hypnotist hypnotizing themselves. But when we first see Hypno Hustler, he's shaking people down for just their pocket change at a show. I feel like this guy should have had bigger dreams. If he got one of his songs on the radio, he could have taken over the world. And coming at the number 1 spot, we have Humbug. Here's the thing, when you hear that there's a hero based off a spider, that's kinda cool because at least spiders are scary, they make web, they do some interesting things. But when you hear there's a villain that just has a general insect theme, you can throw that one in the trash. I really couldn't dislike this villain more. For one, he should be able to beat Spider-Man because he's got a super suit that gives him skills that are on par with the web slinger. But this guy has the worst weakness of all, a love for bugs. He loves bugs so much that Spider-Man has been able to halt this guy from a life of crime by telling him he's going to smash some cockroaches. Like, dude, give your head a shake.
Kicking off the list at number 10. Kang the Conqueror. Also known as Nathaniel Richards, Kang the Conqueror is actually already cast in the live-action MCU, with Jonathan Majors set to play him in Ant-Man 3. But who is Kang? Why is this such a big deal? Well, he made his first appearance in Avengers issue 8 back in 1964, and Kang has seen many centuries. His powers allow him to travel through time, and his futuristic suit of armor is built with weapons that could take on pretty much any superhero. He's insanely smart, and of course he travels with armies. hence the toughness behind them. Now these armies are built in a similar fashion sense, each warrior equipped with the same armor and weaponry. The time travel stuff doesn't come without consequence though, as Kang travels more and more through time. He creates time-displaced duplicates. And as we saw in Avengers Endgame, it can be quite tricky to figure out how to fix time. I think this is the perfect time to introduce a time-hopping villain, especially for Ant-Man, who's now a big-time Avenger who's been around the quantum block a few times. What do you guys think Kang's goal is going to be in Ant-Man 3? Do you think he's going to clean up these timelines, or do you think he's just pissed off and now he wants to just attack anybody who's messed with the quantum realm? Let us know what you guys think in the comments. We love hearing your feedback as well. And before we head on over to number 9, if you guys could go ahead and give us a thumbs up on this video, that would help out a lot at the studio. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching. And let's keep on going with this list. Number 9, the Magus. Making his comic book debut in New Mutants issue 18, the Magus is a powerful enemy of Adam Warlock. He travels alongside Thanos in Guardians of the Galaxy comic books, and in one of the many after-credit scenes for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Adam Warlock's name was briefly mentioned. Now this is important because the Magus is actually an enemy of Adam Warlock. He's a tyrant and a god, and now he appears as a ghostly form because, well, he's an evil version of Adam Warlock from the future. Crazy. So Adam Warlock was created by the Enclave when they were trying to create these perfect invincible beings. They created Adam, and we see this in one of those after credit scenes where she goes, "I shall name him Adam." And then everyone in the theater knows what's coming, they know what's coming up. It was exciting, it was a big moment. So Adam, during his travels, runs into the oppressive Universal Church of Truth and their god being the Magus. He was then shocked to see that the Magus is a dark, twisted version of himself, obsessed with the Infinity Stones, much like Thanos' desire. So could we see Adam come out of his glowing birthing pod and stir up some more Infinity Gem madness in the MCU? Yes, let's hope so. I think if the Guardians of the Galaxy 3 wasn't delayed or pushed on to later, we would have seen this already in motion, maybe in WandaVision. Number 8. Taskmaster. He's the big bad villain coming with the Black Widow movie, which we're still eagerly awaiting for. But just who is this hooded, shadowy fighter from the trailers? Taskmaster made his comic book debut back in Avengers 195. Anthony Masters, he is a former S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, of course, who turned into a mercenary and assassin. And his whole thing that makes him special is that he can replicate your physical skills. He has this photographic reflex memory. So we can watch a video of Black Widow take down some evil henchmen and then bam, he's got it locked into his brain. He knows that choreography. He became a teacher based out of the Taskmaster's Academy to train villains, agents, henchmen, and even some heroes. He learned how to twirl a lasso by watching Cowboys on TV, and he learned how to play basketball by watching the NBA. He's kind of amazing. And he chose to be a villain instead of being an NBA superstar. What a clown. He's quite impressive. I mean, most Hydra agents, AIM troopers, Hellfire Club enforcers, and other big bad groups, they all most likely graduated from the Taskmaster Academy for Henchmen. And I'm super excited to see him in action in Black Widow. I'll gladly wait longer and longer and longer just so I can see him in IMAX hucking a shield. It's gonna be so worth the wait. Mwah. Number 7, Scarlet Witch. No more mutants. The 3 words that changed everything. So Scarlet Witch, okay, we're all counting down the days until the next episode of WandaVision because now it's cooking. Because now we can finally see an evil Wanda Maximoff. More evil than when she was in Ultron. That didn't really, you don't count that. She's the daughter of Magneto and the twin brother of Quicksilver, aka Pietro Maximoff. Now, she was on her father's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, but at one point she did, of course, join the Avengers. She's one of the biggest Marvel characters ever, and during the events of M-Day, she spoke those 3 words, and just like that, a mass amount of mutants were depowered or killed. So after she said those 3 words, that large number that ended up being affected was somewhere around 986,000 people, only leaving a couple hundred mutants left. Now, with the last 2 episodes of WandaVision sneaking up, it's more than likely that we'll see Wanda lean into this villain part. I mean, she's already expanded the Hex to a much larger scale, and now everybody's trapped prepping for the circus, eating swords, talking to the camera, the whole sitcom life, living up the hashtag sitcom life, you know? Tyler Hayward at one point in a previous episode asks if Wanda has a Avengers alias, but they make it very clear that she doesn't. This is almost to remind the audience that she hasn't got a cool nickname yet. So when the name the Scarlet Witch comes in, that'll be a big deal because that'll be her being marked as a villain with the name Scarlet Witch. With this whole Agatha Harkness witch stuff coming into play, I think we're very close to seeing Wanda flip to the dark side. At least for a little bit, until Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness comes out, and then they have to make her not evil and help out and stuff. It's gonna be a whole thing. This is just a start. Number 6, Morgan Le Fay. Medieval witches and alternate timelines. I mean, that should say enough right there. She made her first appearance in the Black Knight issue 1 back in 1955. And Morgan Le Fay is based off of the Arthurian legend, so she's got a little bit of King Arthur, a little bit of evil magic, and 100% reason to remember the name. She's tried to rule the world many times, specifically after the events of Onslaught, where the Avengers go to an alternate Earth, and when they get back in Heroes Reborn, The Return, we have this new world filled with mythical creatures, of course being ran by Morgan Le Fay. Yeah, she got her hands on the Norn Stones and then made Scarlet Witch add her magic to the fun mix as well. So maybe we'll see that come to play as well. We got a lot of playing room with Scarlet Witch and witchcraft and all that magical stuff. It's gonna be crazy. Number 5, the Kree Skrull Empire. They made their comic debut in Fantastic Four issue 2 back in 1962. A lot of 2s in there. And they made their Marvel Cinematic debut only a couple years ago in Captain Marvel. But who are the Skrulls? Well, they're a race of shapeshifters from the Andromeda Galaxy, and they look like green humans almost, except much more powerful and ferocious. They lived on the homeworld of Skrullos in the Drock system, and I loved watching these guys in Captain Marvel. They were a lot of fun, and it was nice to see them actually not be the main villain in the movie. Usually we have these evil gods or these crazy insane robots, but to see the villains of that movie end up wanting just the same chances of survival as humans made it more touchy, more emotional. You know, they're carrying around kids, just looking after their own. Like, it's nice. It was a nice change of pace. Even for a fake out, it was still rewarding. It was still fun. So yeah, they're expert shapeshifters. They can transform into anything, organic or non-organic, as long as it's solid. They can't adapt to superpowers unless you're a super Skrull, which, I mean, those guys you don't want to play around with. The Kree Skrull War is amongst one of the biggest threats to the Avengers because they both believe that the Earth is theirs to claim. See, the Kree performed experiments on humans millennia ago, and then they actually caused the creation of Inhumans. And the Skrulls just see Earth as their new homeworld since theirs was destroyed by Galactus. So a good comic to check out with them would be the 1974 storyline, The Kree Skrull War by Roy Thomas. Avengers 89 to 97. Number 4, Doctor Doom. Making his first appearance in Fantastic Four issue 5, Victor Von Doom likes to go head to head with the Fantastic Four and the Avengers. He's one of the most popular Marvel villains ever, and he's not easy to forget. Just by looking at him, he's one of the coolest guys, I think. He thinks he's right. He thinks that he'll actually do a good job ruling the world. I mean, he's so smart, maybe he's correct, maybe he could do it, but he's kind of evil, so we don't want to see it get to that point. He is the ruler of the land Latveria, and he really cares about this place in Fantastic Four 246. We see this compassion come to play in full force. So why the taste for ruling? Where did this all start, right? Well, each supervillain has their own path, and for Victor, that path started turning to the dark side before he was even born. You see, his mother was a Latverian woman, and she liked to get close to demons. I mean, perhaps a little too close. And after Victor was born, she would attempt to tap into these demonic powers herself, and her clan didn't like that, so they took her out. Sad stuff. So him and his dad were like, okay, see ya, this place sucks, we're out of here. Sadly, during this escape, his dad ended up freezing, and then he had to go on by himself as just a young boy. Then he figured he'd try this demonic power tapping himself later on in life, and then with no luck, he turned to his brain power, and then he soon met Reed Richards when he was in school. So that sad origin plus the college hazing, I mean, this is a villain backstory in the making. Number 3, Loki. Arguably one of the finest characters of the MCU, Loki is the adoptive son of Odin, but who are his real parents? Who is he? What is he doing? Why is he like this? Well, Loki was left as a baby. He was abandoned in his homeworld of Jotunheim, and during a battle, Odin had found this lost child and took him on as his own. What a sweet man, what a sweet gentle giant. So we see this play out in the first Thor movie back in 2011. And then when Loki finds out his motives are peddled by being the offspring of an evil frost giant, he gets a little upset, naturally. He always felt different growing up and often looked down on Thor as he got the most attention and love. Must have been those curly blonde waves. I mean, come on. Odin had chosen not to tell Loki about his true heritage, and he raised him as one of his own. And he's the villain that we love to hate. I'm honestly super excited to see the God of Mischief hop around time in the Loki show coming up. We can't get enough Tom Hiddleston as this role, and I'll happily wait week after week to see him cause more MCU mischief. Happily. Number 2, Ultron. In the MCU, Tony and Bruce are the masterminds behind Ultron, but in the comics, it was actually Hank Pym. Ultron made his first debut back in 1968 in Avengers 54, and beneath the Crimson Cowl, we discover that he is indeed Ultron Pym. See, in the comics, Hank Pym was actually the father of Ultron. There are many versions of Ultron, seeing as he constantly wants to upgrade himself to be bigger and badder. He actually has the same brain patterns as Hank Pym, so he figured it needed a personality, much like our MCU version of Ultron is basically Tony Stark, but with jealousy issues and a lot more metal. A good example of his ruling comes from the Age of Ultron from 2013. Like right off the bat, we can see a dark, life-drained world, and Spider-Man wakes up like, what'd I miss? Ultron is attacking from the future. That's how ahead of the game he is in this comic. And I can't lie, I was really excited for the Age of Ultron movie in the MCU. Like the trailer made him seem so dark and ominous. Even his voice was badass. And then in the movie, he just sounds like normal James Spader and he just walks around talking about omelets. There's rumors that he'll return for WandaVision, but I mean, maybe it's best to leave him in 2015, at least for a bit longer. And finally, number 1. Thanos. You know who this guy is, come on. We first saw him in the after credit scene of Avengers 1 and 2, and then we saw him sitting down in Guardians of the Galaxy, and then we saw him snap away half of all life in the universe in Avengers Infinity War. The Mad Titan first made his comic book debut back in Iron Man issue 55, and funny enough, Robert Downey Jr. is 55 years old, so just a coincidence, literally just a coincidence. So we all know how powerful Thanos is with the Infinity Gauntlet, but if you still haven't seen the movie, I'll touch briefly on those. But look, without the Gauntlet, Thanos is still a villain you don't want to mess around with. He is still a Mad Titan. He was born on the Saturn moon Titan, both of his parents were Eternals, and due to the genetic disorder known as the Deviant Syndrome, his mother actually tried to take him out at first sight. So he's got a pretty dark history already. He got payback when he took out his entire family just to impress Death. And then in the opening of Avengers Infinity War, we see Thanos level the Hulk without even using a single stone. That's how strong this guy is. He just right in the neck, you're done. But then once he gets the 6 Infinity Stones, he has control over each cosmic power. Those of course being soul, time, power, reality, space, and mind. Now after he snapped his fingers and half of all life disappeared, in the comics he does this to get the attention of Death. But in the movie he does so to be a savior, because you know, too many mouths to feed, not enough to go around. I mean, you could just snap some Cinnamon Toast Crunch into everybody's home. That would be a great start, Thanos. Just an idea.
Coming in at number 10, we have Frogman. I mean, if you don't have any powers, you don't have to commit to a super lame animal. Frogman is Eugene Petilio. There was a time when he took his frog suit and he tried to take on some of the hardest hitting street level Marvel heroes. More than once did he come face to face with Spidey, and every time he was taken into the dirt almost immediately. And it's not hard to figure out why. The guy built a suit where the only power was how high he could jump. Like, if you're going to get your powers from some sort of accident or you're born with them, then you don't have a choice. You have to stick with whatever your weird power is. That's your life. But if you're building a power, then you can be whoever you want. Why would you choose frogs? There are so many other creatures you could go with. Like the Falcon. Even though he's not the coolest hero of all time, he's 1,000,000 times cooler than the dude who hops around and tries to cause some havoc. On the bright side, Eugene's son eventually takes on the mantle of the frog suit and tries to be a hero, but on the downside, Eugene's son sucks at being a hero as much as his dad sucks at being a villain. So in the end, the family was doomed to be on the sidelines. I would like to see one of those what if comics where Frogman becomes the greatest hero of all time.
Hey guys, if you like these videos and you want to see some more, make sure you hit that like button. Number 9, the Trapster. His name is Peter Petruski, and I can't believe how long he's been around. Marvel has him come back again and again, despite the fact that he's got no powers other than this weird paste gun. He invented a super adhesive liquid paste and loves using it for evil. He's redesigned his costume multiple times, always ridiculous and far too proud of himself, but he has definitely been around. He appears in multiple stories and has gone up against the likes of Daredevil, Fantastic Four, and of course Spider-Man. All with just a goo gun. He is hired by Red Skull at one point and even has a run-in with Ghost Rider. His paste was once confused for Spider-Man's webbing, and Trapster was furious to see Spidey getting credit in the newspaper for his crimes. Trapster is undeniably lame, but he's obviously got some fans because he's been around so long, so we'll leave him here at number 9. Lame, but not the worst.
And coming in at number 8, we have Stegron, the Dinosaur Man. Once again, if you get to pick your powers, maybe you should shoot a little higher than being a species that already went extinct. They already lost the battle with nature. You think they will be able to take down superheroes? Stegron was originally Dr. Vincent Stegron. He was a scientist who took a liking to the serum which turned Kirk Connors into into the Lizard Man, and he decided he would up the ante a little bit. He mixed the formula with dinosaur DNA and then shot it all up inside his body and turned into a dinosaur-human hybrid. He then went on to try and make an army of dinosaurs to try and take over the world, but was taken down by a force he didn't expect. It was winter. Dinosaurs are cold-blooded apparently, so when winter came around, they all went to sleep, including Stegron. If you're picking your superpower, you should go with something that can handle temperatures below 10 degrees Celsius. Unless you're in Florida or something. If you're down there, you can build the biggest dinosaur army you want, and the state would probably be fine with it.
Number 7. Slide. This guy was a chemical engineer who created a chemical coating that eliminated all friction between that object and surfaces. He's like the opposite of Trapster. He invented the ultimate lubricant. Then this evil tycoon buys up the company that he works for and shuts down the lab. Slide, aka Jerome Beecher, was going to build his own company founded on the non-stick solution he invented, but no bank was willing to give him a loan. So he did what anybody would do and decides to rob the bank. He makes himself a costume out of this material and, free from the clutches of friction, is able to zip around skating on the ground up to 30 miles per hour and can't be stopped, not by people's grabbing hands or even Spider-Man's sticky webbing. Now, this isn't exactly the most lame villain, but the idea of this slippery criminal sliding all over the place just doesn't really do it for me. Where's the stakes? Spidey could just wait for this guy to slip and fall off of a cliff or into oncoming traffic, or they could just have him slip and slide right into a jail cell. I'll say one thing, the way that he zips all over the place in the comic panels looks like a lot of fun. Number 6, the Walrus. With big wet flippers and menacing tusks and the blood-curdling cries of "Arf, arf," it's easy to see how terrifying a walrus-based supervillain could be. This guy is not. Hubert Carpenter was created when his uncle, a janitor, tried again and again to give Hubert powers. They exhausted the names of animals he could have the proportionate strength of all the way through the alphabet till they got to the letter W. He was totally stumped and then became inspired by a poster of the Beatles and becomes the Walrus. He goes on a classic spree of mass destruction, eventually seeing Beast lecturing at a university and decides to attack him to prove that he's the greatest product of modern science. Hilariously enough, it's actually Frogman who gets the credit for taking him down later, and this really gets the blubber boiling. Spider-Man can't help laughing when he meets this guy and winds up taking him down for the second time with just a tap of his finger.
Coming in number 5, we have typeface. You know what everyone loves? Signage! So why don't you make your persona based off that? I'm sure that will pull in a ton of people and you'll become one of the most famous supervillains of all time. No way, man, signage is super lame. Well, typeface, also known as Gordon Thomas, didn't think so, and he had a pretty good foundation. He was a Vietnam War vet who was skilled in hand-to-hand combat, military tactics, and all sorts of weapons. He even beat Spider-Man in their first encounter. If this guy changed his theme to anything other than signage, he probably would have been pretty cool. But the reason that he did this was because when Thomas came back from war, his life fell apart and he ended up getting a job at a sign shop, and it was the only time in his life where he ever felt happy. When the place was bought out, he lost his job, and this was his inspiration to become a villain. Luckily, he eventually switched sides and becomes a hero. If you're gonna get an F on your character, you might as well be on the side of good.
Number 4, the Spot. This guy is something else. Some people think his powers are pretty cool and others hate him, but he definitely belongs on this list. Spider-Man himself bursts into tears laughing upon meeting this guy, and looking like a Dalmatian, it's pretty easy to see why. He's all white, covered in black spots that function as two-way portals. That's pretty much his main thing. He takes the spots and he chucks them around and uses them like portals like this is Looney Tunes, messing around with Spider-Man and even making him punch himself in the face. If this guy doesn't sound lame enough already, the more portals that he throws around, the less spots that he has on his body, making himself more vulnerable. He got these powers after being exposed to the spotted dimension, and the spots can even be suspended in mid-air. It's honestly a pretty cool concept, but the villain himself is just too lame to make it work for me.
And coming in number 3, we have Spider-Side, like genocide but performed by a spider. Yeah, that is not the best writing I've ever heard of in my life. Spider-Side was birthed out of the Clone Saga, which is considered one of the worst sagas in comic history. So any villain to come out of it is probably never going to see the light of day again unless they're used as a joke. Spider-Side is a clone of Spider-Man that has the ability to regenerate from what seems to be any accident. He was convinced at first that he was the real Peter Parker, but then he found out that he was just a freak. Such is the plight of most clones. When you read his character on paper, it sounds super cool. He has the powers of Spider-Man with some of the most deadly features of the Terminator, but the character was used in such a horrible fashion that it became a laughingstock before it ever got its time to shine. Maybe in the future we'll see someone use this character to its full ability.
Number 2. Plant Man. In Strange Tales number 113 from 1963, we meet the mysterious Plant Man. This gardener turned professional criminal was born in London and orphaned at a young age. When he left the orphanage, he became lab assistant to a well-known botanist who was studying the low-level mental activity of plant life. Unfortunately, this guy fired him for focusing too much on this invention he was making and not gardening for him. One day, lightning strikes his plant ray gun that he's been working on, and it becomes imbued with the power to control and animate plant life. Ooh. So he then makes a disguise and sets out to get his revenge for being fired by framing his boss for robbery. The plant life isn't the only thing with low-level mental activity, as this guy made from leaves somehow thinks that he can take on the Human Torch. He is later quickly defeated and his ray gun is destroyed, although I'm sad to say he does appear again in 2002.
And coming at the number 1 spot, we have Big Wheel. This villain's theme is a massive wheel that he rides around and it has guns on it. Reading some of these is like watching a breakdown of a group of YouTubers trying to find out what they need to do so they can set their channel apart from everyone else. Like, maybe if I was the wheel guy, then people would like my content. Well, Big Wheel's just an ordinary guy until the Tinkerer gave him something that was probably a prank, a massive wheel that could ride around and had guns on it. You think something like that would be extremely hard to control, and you would be right. Big Wheel would die when he lost control of his massive wheel car thing and fell into a river and drowned. Here's a lesson for any future villain. If you want to pick a gimmick that is going to set you apart from the rest, before you make a hard decision and invest in a giant wheel that will get you killed and make you look like a fool, you should probably hire a think tank to come up with a better idea. Like I said earlier on in this list, you can pick whatever power you want when you're building it from scratch, so why go with wheels?
Number 10. Scarlet Witch. Scarlet Witch isn't being ranked low for hotness, just FYI, as you all know how much I love Wanda just all around, so I would never do that to her. But I did think to rank her lower because I just feel bad that we're always calling her a villain on this channel, especially because, you know, she is a hero, but especially an Avengers villain, as Wanda is also known for being a key member of that team herself. Still, there have been a few times when Wanda has seemingly been at odds against her teammates. There are the times she has struggled to regain or maintain control over herself when Chthon has threatened to possess her, and there's House of M as well as Axis, and in the MCU, the time she mistakenly fought against the Avengers in the beginning of Age of Ultron, and when she caused mayhem without really meaning to in WandaVision, when her grief turned her into a powerful yet misguided villain. Basically, she's been a villain a lot, but I don't want to call her a villain, and I already know that she's hot, so number 10 for Wanda today. Number 9. Maximus the Mad. Maximus might not always be an Avengers villain, but he has definitely worked against them and his brother on more than one occasion. What makes Maximus so attractive? Well, he's definitely one of those tall, dark, and mad types, which honestly, I gotta say, I'm into it. After all, conventional thinking is just so boring and it's so safe, and Maximus is definitely neither of those things. He is not boring and he is not safe. Maximus is also quite intelligent, and while he is often crazy, he has also claimed insanity before as a means of escaping punishment. So he might not be quite as crazy as you think all the time. Not only has he threatened his brother's reign as king of the Inhumans, having usurped him multiple times in the past temporarily, but he also has threatened the Earth in the past. The entire Earth, which also obviously brought him into direct conflict with the Avengers. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you are loving this channel, be sure to hit that thumbs up, be sure to smash that subscribe, you know, do all the cool things that us YouTubers ask you to do. And thank you. Thank you for doing them. It really does help us. So thank you. Number 8. Viper, or rather Madam Hydra as she was once known. Ophelia Sarkinson has not only been a longtime enemy of Captain America in the comics, but is also known for, at times, coming into conflict with the Avengers. In fact, she even attempted to place a spy in their midst, although this only resulted in her spy, who appeared to be Jessica Drew, aka Spider-Woman, but was actually the Skrull Queen at the time, being recruited to also play double agent for the Avengers and Captain America against both S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra. Didn't quite work out. Ophelia is known for being sneaky, deadly, and manipulative, but she also looks damn good while doing all three. Number 7. Grandmaster. The Grandmaster in the comics is known as one of the Elders of the Universe. He actually made his first appearance in Avengers issue number 69 back in the day. He quickly became known as an Avengers villain when he challenged Kang to a game where they would each pit their own team of champions against one another. Kang chose the Avengers as his champions in the fight, and Grandmaster made his own team himself, dubbing them the Squadron Sinister. You might actually recognize that team, as an alternate version of them also appeared in the comics recently during the Heroes Reborn event, where they were known as the Squadron Supreme. Although Grandmaster isn't particularly sexy in the comics, his MCU counterpart is quite attractive, as he's portrayed by one of the most handsome and charismatic men alive, Jeff Goldblum. And if anyone wants to fight me about that, I'll see you in the comments. Number 6. Dark Avengers. I mean, not all of the Dark Avengers are sexy, but I think overall they're a pretty hot team, especially considering they're made up of some really bad and really deadly people. Among the ranks of the hottest Dark Avengers are Moonstone as Ms. Marvel, Bullseye as Hawkeye, Daken as Wolverine, Sentry, Ares, and Yelena Belova, who was affiliated with the team for a time, although it was kinda later revealed that Yelena likely wasn't actually Yelena for most or for all of that time. The Dark Avengers is also an attractive group in the sense that they are still playing the role of heroes. Now, they might not always play the role well, but there is something sexy about seeing someone you know as bad playing the part of someone who is heroic. I guess it's just fun to see villains become heroes, or at least, you know, pretend to be heroes. I like when bad people are good, even if they're not really good. You know? Is that a thing? I don't know. Number 5. Queen Veronki. Or Veronke? I never know if I'm saying her name right, so I'm just gonna apologize to the queen if I'm saying it wrong. I think Skrulls are some of the hottest enemies of the Avengers out there, namely because they could shapeshift into whatever hotness they wanted, or that their opponent desired if they so chose. Shapeshifters are always the hottest because all options of beauty are basically possible to them. And beauty, after all, is very much subjective when it comes to what we define it as. It really depends on, you know, your personal preferences. Queen Veronki spent much of her time disguised as Spider-Woman while infiltrating Earth, which I also think is a pretty hot form overall. Although not so hot in the sense that this reveal kind of wreaked havoc with Jessica Drew's character development throughout the recent years. Definitely a hot form, but not a hot thing to do. How dare you do that to Spider-Woman? Oh, Queen Veronki. Number 4. Loki. Real talk, I almost forgot to mention Loki on this list, but fortunately I caught myself before I straight up just left him off. I would have been so disappointed in myself if that had happened. Loki is an amazing villain who is also known for being a sometimes shapeshifter and an all-the-time trickster. Loki has taken on many forms before, and even for a time was known as Lady Loki when he stole the body of Thor's love, Lady Sif. He also posed as Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch, attempting to bend the Avengers to his will and create and lead his own team. All in all, Loki is a villain who cannot be trusted. But the fact that almost everything is a game or illusion to them is something that makes Loki so endearing. Even though he's often a liar, you kinda wanna believe him. Loki was so charming, he even fell for a version of himself when he crossed paths with the Loki variant Sylvie in the Loki Disney Plus streaming show. You know also that you're hot if you're falling in love with yourself. Number 3. Ultron. I know this might seem like a weird pick to some, but remember when Ultron was a hot lady? This was during the Ultron Initiative, back when Frank Cho was drawing Ultron and basically decided he wanted to draw a really hot and naked Janet Van Dyne as his Ultron. And honestly, I gotta say, Ultron be looking pretty good here, I cannot deny. Although the reasoning for Ultron wanting to look this way was not quite as solid as the overall appearance of the character. Still, Ultron is kinda hot even when appearing as a masculine automaton. As I've said before in previous lists, I personally think robots deserve love too, and Ultron is really no exception to that rule. Even though, yeah, he does kind of want to destroy all of humanity, but you know, what if we deserve it? And also, what if Ultron just didn't get enough hugs? Did you ever think of that? Maybe if we just gave him some hugs, he'd be good. I'm very optimistic about robots. I'm like, robots don't want to destroy the world, they just want hugs, that's it. Number 2. Enchantress. Enchantress exists to be hot, literally. She is meant to be the perfect woman in terms of her appearance, which allows her often to get what she wants from anyone who might be attracted to her. Now, often in the comics, this means Enchantress will leverage her looks and appearance into manipulating men into doing her bidding or helping her in some other way, by granting her favors or power. However, this doesn't always work in her favor, as just because Enchantress is beautiful and impossibly powerful when it comes to her magical skills, she's simply not the best at everything. Though I would say in most cases she is almost always at least second best, which definitely counts for something and is still pretty impressive. I don't know how I feel about Enchantress's attitude though. I feel like sometimes I'm like, your attitude is not very hot, but you yourself are pretty hot. Also, you're like real powerful, so that's pretty hot. Number 1, Kang. So not only is Kang a hottie in the comics, okay, so maybe he's not quite a hottie in the comics, but he's definitely 100% a hottie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where he's played by Jonathan Majors. Not only did Majors do a great job of introducing us to this enigmatic time-traveling multiversal villain in the season 1 finale of Loki, but he will also be allowing us to fall in love with multiple different Kangs, I'm sure, as we continue to meet him again and again throughout the franchise. After all, the Kang we met wasn't even the most deadly version, and undoubtedly we are going to be in for a real sexy and fun treat when we run into him again, or another version of him, in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. I just hope the Kang truly gets to become the next big bad in the MCU, as he so deserves that. Also, I just want more Jonathan Majors because he's just great, so yes. Give me that, please. Number 10, Alchemax. Alchemax is the villainous corporation that exists in the alternate future of 2099, Earth 928. It is where Miguel O'Hara once worked and came up with the procedure that would ultimately grant him his powers. He was a brilliant geneticist that worked for Alchemax, but didn't like that he was being pressured to rush along his research and begin trials that he believed were unethical. When Miguel tried to leave Alchemax after a test subject died from the procedure, the CEO, Tyler Stone, attempted to prevent him from leaving by getting him addicted to a drug only Alchemax produced called Rapture, which is also apparently a highly addictive substance, so not so great for Miguel. Fortunately, Miguel would end up curing himself, getting spider-like powers, and end up escaping Alchemax, at least for the time being. Alchemax and Stone, however, weren't willing to let him escape so easily, and they would continue to pursue him. It's possible Alchemax could end up being the main big bad of it all in Across the Spider-Verse Part 1, and maybe Part 2, and however many other parts there will be. Number 9, Vulture. While I imagine we will get to see some of Miguel O'Hara's villains as we head to the future of 2099, I would also love it if we get to meet some of Spider-Man Noir's as well. In the reality of the Noirverse, Earth 90214, Vulture is actually a terrifying villain who Spider-Man Noir also has a pretty personal vendetta against. In that reality, Vulture is the one who is personally responsible for killing Peter's Uncle Ben. He was ordered by the Green Goblin of the Noirverse to do this, but still, he was ultimately the one responsible. Vulture here is a carnival geek. That is a person who travels around with a carnival and, not having any particular skill sets of their own, usually performs by biting the heads off of live animals. Vulture went down this road and ended up with a very acquired taste for human flesh. As such, he devoured Peter's Uncle Ben. Later on, Spider-Man Noir would kill the Vulture for what he'd done, when he later attempted to kill his Aunt May. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to learn about more amazing multiversal villains and just, spider villains in general, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. And let us know if there's anyone in particular you want to learn more about. Number 8, the Lizard. The Lizard of Earth 65 is the version we are talking about here. On Earth 65, the same reality that Spider-Gwen hails from in the comics, Lizard is actually none other than Peter Parker. Peter Parker is best friends with Gwen Stacy, and after she becomes the spider-like superpowered hero in this reality, in his place, he wants nothing more than to be like her. He does not know, of course, that this hero, his hero, is actually his friend Gwen. Done with being bullied and having to have Gwen stick up for him as well, he creates a serum which he uses on himself. It gives him power, but it also turns him into the monster and villain known as Lizard, as his reptile self takes over. The Lizard ends up dying when he comes up against Spider-Gwen, and is only then revealed to be Peter Parker, Gwen's best friend. He dies in her arms. It's all pretty tragic. We saw an allusion to this part of Gwen and Peter's stories from Earth 65 in Gwen's origin flashback in Into the Spider-Verse. But what if Peter didn't die? What if he's still alive and he somehow returns? That would be intense for Gwen to deal with. Perhaps he's an alternate of this alternate who is still alive, or perhaps, like I said, the Lizard didn't really really die in Gwen's universe. There are multiple approaches you could take here. I personally would love to see him come back because I just would love to see their dynamic. Number 7. Ultimatum. Ultimatum is actually an alternate and evil version of Miles Morales in the comics who hails from the main continuity of Earth 616. You see, in the comics, Miles is actually not from the main continuity, not originally, but instead from an alternate universe, the universe of Earth 1610, known as the Ultimate Universe, because that was the line of comics that it was a part of. The Ultimates themselves were actually a superhero team akin to Earth 616's Avengers. On Earth 616, Miles Morales was a criminal who ended up traveling for a time to Earth 1610. When he returned home to Earth 616, he learned that Miles Morales of 1610 was also residing there. Resentful of the other Miles Morales, Spider-Man, and wanting him out of his way, he aimed to send Miles and his family back to their home reality of Earth 1610, against their will, obviously. Fortunately, Miles and his uncle, Aaron Davis, aka Prowler, who also wound up resurrected and on Earth 616, foiled the plot of Ultimatum, defeating him. At least for now. Miles is such a sweetheart in the animated Spider-Verse reality, so I'd really love to see him fight against someone who is very much his opposite. I definitely want to see Miles take on his evil version. Number 6. Peter Parker 2099. In an alternate 2099 future, not the same reality that Miguel is from, Peter Parker actually becomes the CEO of Alchemax, the villainous corporation that Spider-Man 2099 once worked for. In this reality, Peter Parker was still Spider-Man, but allowed the public to believe that the hero was dead. Retired from heroics, he became the CEO of Alchemax, working sort of in secret, because you know, he's supposed to be dead. His plan was to fix his past mistakes and bring back all of those people whom he couldn't save during his time as Spider-Man. This alternate version of Peter also has a prolonged lifespan due to fancy future anti-aging technology, so that's how he's still alive, by the way. He attempts to get Miguel from the alternate 2099 reality, which is I guess really the main 2099 reality, and his own younger self to join him, but both refuse, prompting 2099 Peter to fight Miguel. This evil version of Spider-Man I think could fit well into Across the Spider-Verse as a main antagonist, considering his whole plot involves rewriting reality, which you know could potentially affect and threaten the entire multiverse. 2099 Peter Parker comes from the Spider-Man video game Edge of Time, where he was revealed as the main antagonist. Or well, he ended up kind of being the main antagonist I guess at the end of the game. Also, while Edge of Time wasn't well received, and I know that, the story in general was praised. And I think the story is pretty cool, so yeah, that's just my 2 cents. Number 5. Superior Spider-Man. Superior Spider-Man is a version of Spider-Man who is also Dr. Otto Octavius. Let me explain. Back in the 616 comic book continuity, Otto is basically dying and manages to trick Peter into a body swap scenario. While Peter is trapped inside Otto's failing body and dies, Otto lives on in Peter's body as Spider-Man. Superior Spider-Man to be exact, because you know, this is Otto, so he's like, I'm gonna be the best Spider-Man ever. Peter would eventually return, and Otto would also go back to his usual Doc Ock appearance and his hijinks, but for a time, he was the Spider-Man of the 616 reality. He's done good and bad things before in the comics, and ended up accidentally bringing back the Inheritors after they were defeated the first time in Spider-Verse. Oops. Superior Spider-Man, while known for being a villain, is also like an anti-hero, so we could really see him in either light were he to show up in Across the Spider-Verse Part 1. But yeah, he's been a villain and a hero, so I figured I could still count him as a villain for this list. I just really want Superior Spider-Man. I think a lot of us do. Number 4. Army of Doc Ocks. Why stop at 1? Or I guess 2 Doc Ocks when we could have a whole army of them, right? I mean, there isn't just Doc Ock Otto Octavius somewhere out there. We also have Olivia Liv Octavius's version, and we could have Superior Spider-Man as well. There are lots of cool alternates of Otto out in the multiverse that we could meet in Across the Spider-Verse, and Doc Ock is such a powerful and interesting villain that we could have a whole army of them to face. I'm not sure what the motivation would be, or like who would ultimately be the Doc Ock in charge, the like head Doc Ock, maybe Superior, but I'm sure when all those octopi put their minds and I guess their tentacles together, they could come up with some pretty ingenious schemes. Also, I feel like now that I said put their tentacles together, I'm like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't have said that, but I said it. And you know what? Sometimes you gotta be like all tentacles in and then get your mind out of the gutter. Number 3, the Spider. The Spider is one of the worst alternate versions of Spider-Man we've ever met. He is super evil and is basically a version of Peter Parker that is combined with Cletus Cassidy. This alternate version of Peter Parker has red hair and was born a sociopath, because I guess everyone that has red hair is a sociopath. I don't know. I don't understand that connection, but you know, people with red hair, apparently they have no souls. He possesses a dark sense of humor and enjoys causing pain to others. He first showed up in the Exile series and hails from Earth 15. Like Carnage on Earth 616, he revels in hurting others. He possesses a symbiote very similar to Carnage, although it is actually known as the Spider symbiote instead of the Carnage symbiote in this reality. What could be cooler than seeing Miles and the rest of the Spider Army take on an alternate and evil version of Peter Parker? Also, Let There Be Carnage did well at the box office, right? I'm pretty sure it did. So wouldn't it make sense to have some kind of version of Carnage show up here? And this is like both. It's like a Spidey and a Carnage together. Number 2, Morlun. I'm actually a really big fan of Morlun, even though I feel like he's not really everybody's cup of tea. He's my cup of tea. I like the fact that he's a Victorian-style energy vampire from an alternate past. Morlun feeds on the energy of spider totems, hunting them down and feeding off of them. He is extremely powerful by himself and is sometimes not even just a one energy vampire kind of deal. So sometimes if you're facing Morlun, it's not just Morlun you're facing. Morlun is proven to be a hard foe to beat, especially because he rarely stays dead for long and usually shows back up to torment Spider-Man and taunt him, often threatening that he will be his end. Morlun is also the guy who ate Spider-Man's eye that one time when he was on the brink of death, plagued by a mysterious ailment. Number 1, the Inheritors. The Inheritors are the rest of Morlun's crew and family. They are a powerful energy vampire clan which hunt down various totems and consume them. Because yeah, there aren't just spider totems out there apparently, there's lots of other totems. Spider totems, by the way, if you're confused by what that means, are basically spider folks from across the multiverse who are destined to end up being connected to the spirit of the spider, either possessing powers related to spiders or some other important connection which generally gives them purpose in their life. The Inheritors ended up getting control over the Master Weaver, thereby turning him into an enemy of the spider totems, even though that wasn't his intended purpose to begin with. They used the Master Weaver's knowledge and power to travel the multiverse and hunt down spider totems within it. The Inheritors are generally led by Solus or Morlun, and their members have included Verna, Genix, Karn, Bora, Brix, Dora, Deimos, Malos, Mortia, Namura, and Thanos. And I probably said some of those wrong, so sorry about that. Like Morlun, they are also from the alternate reality of Earth 001. And in case you didn't know, the Inheritors were kind of like the main thing when we had Spider-Verse in the comics and then Spider-Geddon. So it would make sense that they would show up at some point in these movies. Please, I would like to see it. Maybe I'm the only one? I don't know.
Kicking off the list at number 10, Sandman. William Baker entered the world of comics in 1963 with Amazing Spider-Man issue 4. He was seen as one of the main villains in Spider-Man 3, and yes, he was at one point an Avenger. Who knew? So when Flint Marko held the mantle of Sandman, he bumped into the Thing, and they had a little heart-to-heart, a little chat about life and how to use your abilities perhaps for, for good. So he started to help Spider-Man a bit here and there, and then in Avengers issue 329, Captain America announced a new Avengers team, and on that roster was the Sandman. He was one of the 7 reserve members. He of course didn't last because, well, he was a reserve member for one, and coming from the villain side already, I'm sure he had one foot out the door anyways. Shame. And before we continue on with this list, guys, if you haven't already, make sure to hit that like button down below because those little thumbs up are great for the page and great for our studio. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching. Now back to some Avengers who became villains. Number 9, Sentry. Making his first appearance in Sentry issue 1, of course, Robert Reynolds was a struggling addict who made his way into a laboratory and discovered something called the Golden Sentry Serum. So of course he consumed it, and then he got the surprise of a lifetime when he was then given the power of 1,000,000 exploding suns. That's a lot of power. That plus a homemade costume equals a brand new superhero. Robert fought alongside the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, then the New Avengers. Things changed for Robert when Norman Osborn decided to put together a little team of his own, the Dark Avengers. So Sentry was also once a Horseman of Death, serving alongside Banshee, Grim Reaper, and Daken. He even considered himself as the heir to Apocalypse at one point, so definitely not an Avenger anymore, for sure. Number 8, Namor. King Namor is of course Marvel's version of Aquaman. He's the king of the seas, and he's also not a fan of metahumans, surprisingly. He mostly would go head to head with Black Panther and Wakanda. He wasn't a fan of Wakanda. He often attacked it quite a bit. He was asked to join the Avengers back in 1963 in Avengers issue 16, but he declined. too cool for school. We get it. All right, cool. He did join for a brief amount of time though, but when the Avengers vs. X-Men happened, he stood with the X-Men and he fought Luke Cage and the Thing. What a traitor. I mean, he's not the worst, but if you're not with the Avengers, you're clearly against them. Especially after you've helped them out for a bit and then you change your mind? Come on, dude. Number 7. The Incredible Hulk. So Thor Ragnarok was loosely based off the Planet Hulk storyline. I say loosely because, well, the comics, that story didn't end up going so well, obviously. Because on Sakaar, the rocket that he arrived in ended up blowing to smithereens, causing some casualties that left the Hulk a little heartbroken, to say the least. So he rolls his shoulders back a few times, and then he heads back to Earth, and thus begins the World War Hulk storyline. He just destroys everybody. It's so scary. I mean, all the heroes that Earth has come to love just in the path of this death train. Like, he locks the Illuminati in Madison Square Garden and then makes them fight to the death. It's like Madison Square Up Garden. I mean, once you spend enough time on Sakaar, I guess it becomes second nature. I don't know. The whole story is a bloody good mess. It's great seeing the panic on the Avengers' faces the entire time because they know that they're screwed, and that's what makes it real and scary. Number 6, Sabretooth. Victor Creed made his debut in Iron Fist issue 14, and he's been known as one of Wolverine's biggest rivals. But during the Avengers X-Men Axis storyline, the Red Skull stole the brain of Charles Xavier and he planned to wipe out all of mutant kind. And then in book 2, we see the inversion, where good goes bad and bad goes good. Interesting time. Because Doctor Doom and Scarlet Witch cast a spell, so now Sabretooth was on the good side. So after the dust settled, Iron Man made it so that Sabretooth wouldn't flip back, so Sabretooth joined the Avengers Unity Division. This didn't last forever, and recently in House of X issue 6, Sabretooth faced trial among the Quiet Council, and let's just say he ended up swallowed by Krakoa below the surface, where he's trapped in a state of permanent stasis for the rest of his life. How comfortable. I mean, he kind of made it easy for them too. He clearly didn't fight for his case. Number 5, Hawkeye. In the MCU, Hawkeye's had it pretty rough. I mean, by the time Avengers Endgame rolled out, Clint had lost his entire family, and then 5 years after Thanos snapped his fingers, we catch up with him in Tokyo, and he's not the same guy that we once knew. Now he's taken heads and he's taken names. We get our first look at Ronan. Now, I know that Natasha meets up with him and they have a beautiful moment, and then he rejoins the team. He even volunteers to test the time travel tech himself. But if we look back at Avengers 1, Hawkeye is a villain for like most of that movie. He turns evil before the opening title even pops up on screen. He's the guy who took down the helicarrier. He almost killed everybody on that boat. Now, I know Loki had a scepter and that caused it, so if we look at Avengers 1 and Avengers Endgame, I think it's safe to meet in the middle and say that the MCU Hawkeye has been somewhat of a Avenger who turned into a villain, at least for a bit. Number 4, Quicksilver. Pietro Maximoff is the twin brother of Wanda Maximoff, and in Avengers West Coast issue 57 back in 1965, he joined the team. Pietro has been trouble for the team for a long time. I mean, he convinced Wanda to do what she did in House of M. He's framed the Avengers for treason, and he has no problem using pieces of Terrigen to give his daughter Luna special abilities, even though he knows he shouldn't do that. Also, that whole thing with Layla Miller after House of M, where he saved her life just so he can be the one to take her out, believing that she was responsible for the House of M event. Yeah, it's safe to say he went from Avenger to villain. Like, those are just 3 out of many, many things. In West Coast Avengers 33, Magneto's bloodline got the best of him, and he got fellow Avengers captured by the communist gang. Fastest guy ever, but makes the most mistakes. I don't understand. Number 3, the Vision. Making his glorious debut in Avengers issue 57, the Vision is a synthezoid, and in the comics, he was created by Ultron using parts of the original Human Torch and the mind of Wonder Man. Just bam, smack together. He turned on his original creator, Phineas Horton, and he joined the Avengers. Nice. And then in the MCU, he's created as Ultron's new body, but with the addition of the Mind Stone and a little bit of Jarvis, we have an android Avenger. Also nice. But during the Secret Empire storyline, Vision was part of Hydra's Avengers when they were taking over the world, all from an AI virus. Gotta get that firewall installed, my friend. Arnim Zola was the one to blame for that. So who knows, maybe now with the White Vision being free in the MCU and pretty much reborn, his firewall probably isn't the best either. Also, it's confusing because it appears that Vision gets all of his memories back, but then he flies away and then he's not to be seen for the rest of the show. So clearly something's up here. I'm betting the MCU does him dirty. Maybe they reprogram him to make him evil or something. Or he might become Ultron. That was a big theory for WandaVision. We'll see. Number 2. Captain America. There are a couple lines from Steve Rogers that fans will remember that took place in the MCU, like Avengers Assemble, that is America's ass, but the line Hail Hydra was followed by a roar of applause on opening night of Endgame. Why? Because not only does he use his post-Avengers knowledge to obtain the scepter, which in that of itself is already pretty sweet, but because the audience expects another cool elevator fight and Steve outsmarts us. But the line Hail Hydra comes right from the comics, and a bit of a darker scenario. The last words of Captain America Steve Rogers were that of Hail Hydra, and fans were not happy. This was huge news. People were pretty upset. Readers were sending in death threats. Like, could you imagine? The 2017 series Secret Empire concluded that bad Captain America was a double, and that the good guy was locked in the cosmic cube. Okay, solid save, but those images of evil Steve will live in our heads rent-free, so thank you for that. And finally, number 1, Scarlet Witch. Of course, I'm saving her for last, of course. She's the daughter of Magneto and the twin brother of Quicksilver, aka Pietro Maximoff. Now, she was on her father's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, but at one point she did of course join the Avengers as well. She's one of the biggest Marvel characters ever, and during the events of M-Day, she spoke those 3 words, no more mutants, and just like that, a mass amount of mutants were depowered or wiped out. That large number being 986,618, only leaving a couple hundred left. That's crazy, that's like Thanos level destruction almost. And then in the MCU as well, we just watched Wanda become a villain over a 9-week period. She had a mental breakdown similar to M-Day, and she trapped Westview in her hex. Now, of course, she frees everybody and things look pretty back to normal, kind of, by the end of the show. But with that after credit scene of her studying the Darkhold, and with the given knowledge that Wanda is in the next Doctor Strange movie, she's for sure going to become a villain. Even for a little bit, she'll be a villain, for sure. I can't wait to see what else she does. She looked like she was studying up pretty fast while she was sipping tea on her doorstep, so I don't know. Her mind's crazy. She can do anything she wants.
Number 10, Doctor Doom. I love Doctor Doom. He just looks so cute. But of course, this is still a Doctor Doom alternate, so I imagine they're still quite menacing. Doctor Doom is just what he sounds like, an anthropomorphic duck who also happens to have a similar appearance and attitude to Doctor Doom of Earth 616. He makes an appearance as an adversary in the first issue of Peter Porker, the Spectacular Spider-Ham. Being a cartoon version of Doctor Doom, aka Victor Von Doom, Doctor Doom also hails from the reality of Spider-Ham's Earth 8311. We also learn in his first appearance that against his own will or his own interests, Doctor Doom happens to be a well-liked rock star, becoming famous against his wishes. He was trying to create his own rock group and make money off of them, but instead he ended up in the limelight despite his protests. Number 9, Killer Kravinoffs. The Killer Kravinoffs are the grandchildren of Kraven the Hunter from the dystopian post-apocalyptic reality of Old Man Logan and Old Man Hawkeye, Earth 807128. With Kraven no longer around to hunt, in his place are his grandchildren. There are 3 of them, but only one ends up actually getting a name. Sadly, their existence in the comics is short-lived for how cool they look and should be as descendants of Kraven. They only appear in one issue of Old Man Hawkeye, showing up in issue number 4. They run into Marshall Bullseye there and actually end up getting killed by him. And friends, before we move on to the next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to learn about even more alternate villains, there are so many alternate Spider-Man villains I could tell you about, so be sure to hit that like button. Number 8, Karn. Karn ends up becoming the Great Weaver, an ally to the Spider Totems in the end. Spider Totems are spider-like superpowered beings who actually receive their powers through fate rather than circumstance, as we were initially led to believe with heroes like Spider-Man. Karn was a member of the Inheritors, a coven of energy vampires who feed on various animal kingdom totems such as the spider variety. Spider Totems. After Karn was blamed for the death of his mother, he was made to work to atone his misdeeds. He traveled around various multiverses hunting down spider totems at the behest of the other Inheritors, though he never really enjoyed it and thus was a reluctant villain. When the previous Master Weaver ended up dead, Karn decided to take his place and instead became an ally to the Spider Army as opposed to a villain of theirs. He did however kill spider totems back when he was hunting and working for the Inheritors, and a member of the Inheritors really. Like his fellow inheritors, Karn hails from the reality of Earth 001 and Loom World, which is their home world. Number 7. King Pig. King Pig is Spider-Ham's version of Kingpin. As such, King Pig hails from the same reality of Earth 8311. He is, as you guessed it, one big mean pig, who also happens to be a major crime lord, like his 616 counterpart. However, while Kingpin in the comics is more into drug rings and other organized crime, King Pig is into smuggling cheese and running the cheese market. Now I want cheese. King Pig operated in secret, and despite the police trying to uncover who was behind the crimes in their town of Hakawatami, Wisconsin, King Pig managed to be too sneaky for them to catch. In the end, it was up to Spider-Ham to discover just who was behind all this illegal activity. We already had Kingpin show up as the villain in Into the Spider-Verse, so how funny and great would it be to see his Toon counterpart in Across the Spider-Verse? Also, I'd really like to go to Spider-Ham's reality, if we get a reality hop, which I think we're gonna get to do that. Number 6. Goblin. In the noir verse of Earth 90214, Green Goblin's counterpart is simply known as Goblin. Here, Norman Osborn is still a ruthless villain who is the major crime boss in New York and leads his own villainous group known as the Enforcers. The Enforcers are made up of former carnival freaks who each have their own unique talents, featuring characters like the noir verse's Vulture and Chameleon. Goblin turned to a life of crime because he was mistreated, himself being a circus freak who was ridiculed for his scaly, green, reptile-like skin. Goblin in the comics is the one who is ultimately responsible for the death of Peter Parker's Uncle Ben and for the death of Ben Urich, the reporter and Felicia Hardy's former lover in this reality. Number 5. Patton Parnell. Patton Parnell has to be one of my favorite of the evil alternate Spider-Men out there, and I think he would make a bomb villain in Across the Spider-Verse Part 1, especially if we get some kind of League of Evil Spider-Men. Patton Parnell is the alternate Spider-Man from Earth 51412. Like the Spider, who is on Part 1 of our list, Parnell also has some sociopathic tendencies and enjoys recreational activities like burning ants with a magnifying glass. He ends up becoming a Spider-Man in a more literal sense, becoming a spider-like monstrosity who is also capable of laying eggs, as his Uncle Ted, who also appears to mistreat young Patton, finds out. Rather than Patton Parnell having an origin story of fantasy and heroism, his origin is basically more like a horror story, where Patton ends up as a murderous, monstrous, spider-like villain who develops a taste for human flesh and terrorizes his next-door neighbor and crush, Sarah Jane. Number 4. Tyler Stone. We talked about Alchemax, the villainous future corporation, on the Part 1 to our list, and even an alternate video game reality where Peter ends up as the man behind that corporation, but we have yet to focus on the vice president of Alchemax's R&D department in the main 2099 reality of Earth 928, Tyler Stone. Tyler Stone is not only VP of Research and Development at Alchemax, but also is secretly Miguel O'Hara's biological father. Tyler Stone had an affair with the wife of one of his employees, Conchata, who is Miguel's mother. Miguel doesn't learn until later on that he is the son of Stone, and ends up on the staff of Alchemax, working as a brilliant geneticist for them. When he tries to leave, however, it is Stone who slips him the highly addictive drug only made by Alchemax known as Rapture, to prevent him from leaving. Fortunately, Miguel manages to free himself via experimentation, which also gives him spider-like powers and abilities, becoming Spider-Man 2099. Number 3. Spider Carnage. Similar to the Spider on Part 1 of our list, Spider Carnage is another evil alternate version of Peter Parker, or at least he thinks he's Peter Parker. Spider Carnage came into being following Miles Warren cloning Peter. In this reality, Peter lost his Uncle Ben and later also his Aunt May, which left him completely brokenhearted. His state of mind was only made worse when he was made to believe the version who had escaped Miles, dyeing his hair blonde and taking up the name Ben Reilly, might actually be the true Peter Parker, with Peter potentially being the clone. This revelation filled Peter with hatred for Ben, and would later fuel the bond he had with the Carnage symbiote, who entered into his world via an interdimensional portal during a time when Peter fought Ben. His rage and the symbiote turned him into a villain known as Spider Carnage, and his plan was to destroy all realities across the multiverse. This version of Spider Carnage appeared in the 90s animated Spider-Man television series. Number 2. Red Goblin. Red Goblin isn't necessarily an alternate variant considering he is the main reality 616 Norman Osborn, but Superior Spider-Man is also technically Earth 616's Otto Octavius, and I counted him last time without much complaint, so I figured we could put Red Goblin on this list and it should be fine. Red Goblin is a villain that comes from a period in Marvel Comics where a depowered Norman Osborn ended up getting his hands on the Carnage symbiote and convincing it to bond with him, with both of them bonding over how they enjoyed hurting and tormenting people. Yikes. The Carnage symbiote also helped to cure Norman Osborn of the antidote that was blocking him from using the Goblin serum to regain his previous power set. So this version comes with both the powers of Carnage and those of Green Goblin. Plus you get the brilliant and twisted minds of Norman and Carnage combined. Who doesn't want Red Goblin? He's such a cool villain. Put him in Across the Spider-Verse! Number 1. Evil Spider-Man Army. With the potential for characters like Patton Parnell, Spider-Carnage, Earth 65's Lizard, Ultimatum, Superior Spider-Man, The Spider, and Peter Parker 2099 to show up, it seems plausible that we could get a whole Evil Spider-Man Army, or Evil Spider Army, in Across the Spider-Verse. I don't know about you, but I'd love to see some Evil Spider-Men team up to take on the heroic Spider-Folks we've come to know and love from the previous film and beyond in the comics. I think that would be super cool. The reality is, in the multiverse, we don't even need an external threat. The threat could simply be Spider-Man himself, considering there are so many great evil possibilities that appear throughout the catalog of Marvel's multiversal realities.
Number 10. Scarlet Witch. So many of us like to see the Scarlet Witch as this misunderstood magic user that is just looking for love. Well, she used to be one of the original members of the Brotherhood of Evil. She was teamed up with Magneto right from the start, and for years she thought her powers were only mutant powers. I mean, it made sense her brother Quicksilver was a mutant and the two of them were both working for Magneto. He was a mutant and everybody they were fighting was also a mutant. But after Scarlet Witch and her brother decided to part ways from the Brotherhood, they would decide that they needed to start using their powers for good and join the Avengers. It's wild how in comic books you can go from domestic terrorist to hero like that fast. It's incredible. But even after Scarlet Witch would decide to be a hero, it wouldn't be the last time she would do something to hinder nearly every hero in the world. And of course I'm referring to the infamous M-Day would have Scarlet Witch use her powers to rewrite reality and see it to that the mutants are nearly extinct. This was partly caused by her relationship with Magneto, who's her dad, and a very not great dad, I can also say. And before we go to number 9, if you guys could go ahead and give us a thumbs up on this video because it does go a long way for our channel. Helps us out quite a bit. You guys are the best. Now back to some Avengers who used to be villains. Number 9, Wonder Man. It's hard to know in the Marvel Universe when you're being tricked because everyone has got a plan up their sleeve, even the good guys. But if you're working with the tactical Baron von Zemo, then you better believe that he's doing something dirty behind the scenes. See, Wonder Man used to just be a regular working class man. Actually, his story is nearly identical to that of the Vulture in the MCU. He's a working man. Stark puts him out of the business and then he has to do whatever he can to try and make ends meet. So eventually he's given the option to use advanced tech to get back at the people who wronged him, and he loves the idea of that. I mean, I'm kind of on board with that too, let's do it. That opportunity would come back when Baron von Zemo would approach him with a proposition. He would give Wonder Man, who was then just Simon Williams, the power of ionic energy so he could have the power to crush Iron Man. But partway through his anger faded and he decided that taking on Iron Man wasn't the answer after all. So the two of them turned on Baron von Zemo. But here's the catch. The Baron isn't going to get caught with his pants down. He had Poison Williams who would soon die after. So his hero life was short-lived because once you die in comics, you are dead forever. Moment of silence. Only for a bit because he came back later on. Yeah, he came back. He was brought from the dead and is now a registered member of the Avengers. So, welcome back. Number 8, The Winter Soldier. You should know the story of the Winter Soldier by now. If you've not seen that movie yet, please go check it out because it's arguably the best movie in the MCU. And the story of the Winter Soldier has more flip-flops than a beach in Florida. The Winter Soldier was formerly Bucky Barnes, the best friend and right-hand man of Captain America. A tragic accident would have him fall to his death, or so Steve Rogers thought. It turns out Hydra got a hold of him and used some experimental tech to not only give him one of the most badass robotic arms that I've ever seen, but they also brainwashed him to be a living weapon. They used his advanced war training and then embedded him with Hydra assassination techniques. He was then frozen over and over again, only to be thawed out when Hydra needed to send him out to kill somebody. But eventually he would cross paths with Steve Rogers and the old memories would come flooding back to him. He would fight back against his Hydra programming and turn to become a good guy. even if he had to fight Iron Man to do it. Number 7, Hawkeye. Man, to think that one of the main members of the MCU used to be a bad guy, I mean, like, it's not that hard to believe now, but when you see him break down in Avengers Endgame and start chasing down gangs in Tokyo, then it all starts to make sense how this guy can have a dark side. But the first couple of times that we see Hawkeye show up, he was working with Black Widow, someone who actually we'll be mentioning later on this list. She would get him to tag along on missions where the two of them had to take down the flying tin can man known as Iron Man. But there wasn't enough hate in Hawkeye's heart to keep him on the dark side, and he eventually swapped over to work with the heroes, and since then, he hasn't looked back. Number 6, Loki. Now, never an official member of the Avengers. I mean, he didn't stand with them when every hero in the MCU teamed up to storm Thanos' army and save the universe, but he did some of the most heroic acts that set everything up so the Avengers could save the day. He summoned Surtur so that he could take out Hela. He teamed up with Thor to save the people of Asgard, and he even threw his life on the line to try and kill Thanos. The guy's time as a hero is pretty short-lived, but he did come through when it counted, and I think the Avengers will look back at him as one of the most heroic members of them all. Just saying. Number 5, Red Hulk. I really love the Hulk's villains. I mean, you have the leader, which kind of represents the opposite of the Hulk, all brains with very little brawn. But then so many of his other villains are just like him, but slightly different, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Let's just get 2 cannonballs and fire them at each other and see what happens. Boom. The results are usually pretty explosive. Well, if you didn't know, Red Hulk is the general who always wanted the Hulk dead. Thaddeus Ross. I guess he went down the "if you can't beat him, join him" line, thinking that when it came to taking out the big green beast, he was actually able to keep his identity a secret, but once it was finally revealed who he was, it would be Captain America that would team up with him. With the two of them having a military background, it kind of made sense. It also made sense for the Red Hulk to become a hero. I mean, Thaddeus wasn't that far off in his quest to stop the Hulk, even though the big green beast is a force for good most of the time. He would be seen as a threat to everybody else around him. And Thaddeus seemed to have better control over his version of the Hulk than Bruce ever did. Number 4, Namor. It doesn't matter what comic book universe you're in, you gotta have a fish dude. That's just a staple of how everything works, that's it. And for the Marvel Universe, we of course have Namor. The Submariner, he was actually one of the original villains in Marvel. The dude's pretty old, with his first comic coming out in 1939. He's the ruler of Atlantis, and he didn't like the way things were handled on the surface, so he decided to duke it out with the people walking on land. Turns out that he wasn't a match for the people on the surface, so he decided to join them. He would eventually team up with the Avengers, but even though he was now fighting side by side with them, he's always had a superiority complex when it comes to dealing with surface-dwelling super people. And even though the Avengers saw him as an ally, when push came to shove, he would ditch them and team with the X-Men to try and take down the Avengers. He even flooded Wakanda, which seems like a bit of an overreaction. He's always had a sore spot when it comes to the Black Panther. I think maybe it's because he hates seeing a surface civilian as advanced as Atlanteans. Could be. Number 3, Vision. Even though the MCU will have you thinking that Vision was made by the Avengers to take out Ultron, it was really the other way around. Hank Pym's least favorite kid would make the android as a tool to take out the Avengers. I guess he didn't feel like getting his hands dirty that day. Okay. Well, he should have done a better job at programming the damn thing, because while fighting the Avengers, Vision decides to swap sides and teaming up with the good guys, which in the end seems to be the worst possible thing that could happen for Ultron. You build something to kill the Avengers, but then it turns on you, and then the Avengers are now stronger, but then all the secrets that this machine knows about you will be leaked to them. But now Vision has become one of the most famous members of the Avengers, with him and Wanda starring in the new WandaVision TV show on Disney+. And don't worry if you haven't gotten around to watching that yet. I'm not going to ruin anything for you, but you definitely should go and watch it right now. We're only 3 episodes in, so you got time to catch up before it ends. Plenty of time. Number 2, Black Widow. I mean, her name is Black Widow, so I mean, that's not usually how heroes are named unless they're an anti-hero, the Punisher, you know? It should be no surprise that she's super sneaky, and she actually used to be one of Iron Man's greatest villains. The Black Widow started out as an agent sent over from Russia to bring down one of the founding members of the Avengers. It's kind of weird to think that in Marvel universes that would be developed down the line, she would be one of the founding members. It's awesome. But the villain was just so popular that nobody wanted to see her go. And after the Cold War ended, the story of a Russian agent that was sent over to dismantle a part of America that everybody loved just wasn't as compelling as it once was. And number 1, Doctor Doom. Now I know this is only for a limited time, but it's still so wild that it deserves a spot on this list, a very high spot on this list. We're talking about the same Doctor Doom that once was ruling Battleworld, the same Doctor Doom that stole Odin's powers, the same guy. He's one of the biggest, baddest villains that gives Thanos a run for his money with the amount of schemes that he's pulled. Well, there was a time when Victor Von Doom suffered a pretty serious blow to the head, an injury that would take out most people, but we're not talking about most people, are we? Valeria came through to fix up Doom's brain, and not long after that, he was working with the good guys. Right around this time, Tony was in a deep coma, so someone needs to step in the role of Iron Man. And who better than Dr. Doom himself? Having Doom become Iron Man for that brief moment was one of the coolest moments ever, hands down.
And at 10, Sin Eater. Stanley Carter's parents were addicts who ended up falling in love with each other. Stanley's father, though, later died, leaving Stanley's mother pregnant and alone. Stanley's mother was sent to a rehabilitation clinic, and Stanley went to be raised by his grandparents in the Ozark Mountains. Stanley's grandfather was a zealous pastor who reveled his son and took it out on Stanley. After Stanley's grandfather died due to a rattler bite, this congregation held a sin-eating ritual for him, and young Stanley presumably saw a Sin Eater, a masked hermit who would eat fruit placed in the corpse of someone's body to take the dead sins for himself, because, you know, that's not gonna screw up a child's development. Stanley ended up joining the NYPD and became a detective after growing up, having multiple instances of executing criminals, particularly drug traffickers, including his own partner. This is where he really became the Sin Eater, a maniacal serial killer and probably one of Spider-Man's scariest foes with no powers, but with the MO of killing anyone who sins. The Sin Eater's first victim was actually his own lover, police captor Jean DeWolf, whose death attracted attention throughout all New York City, including their friend Spider-Man. The Sin Eater had stolen DeWolf's purse, creating a precedent of taking one personal object for each of his victims, and this object would usually have to be associated with the victim's sin in some way. It's probably gonna be a loose way, but yeah. And 9, Atrocity. Introduced and only seen in the Spider-Man game Spider-Man Edge of Time from 2011, Atrocity was created after Anti-Venom went into a blind rage, accidentally knocked Otto Octavius and Walker Sloan into Walker Sloan's gateway. It was like a time gateway. The three fused in the space-time continuum. I tried getting Taylor to put this on a list for ages, so I'm gonna put it here because holy damn, this is one hell of a villain that I want to see come back. Atrocity would occasionally attack Peter Parker or Miguel O'Hara with its teleporting tentacles throughout their journey in Alchemax's building, until it eventually revealed itself and attacked Peter Parker. Atrocity was defeated but would later appear again, attempting to kill Peter Parker at the same time the CEO was fighting Miguel O'Hara. Peter manipulated Atrocity into attacking electrified pillars, stunning it. Peter took this opportunity to remove those tentacles and send them through the time gateway. These tentacles were also used to drain the Alchemax CEO of his powers. After both Atrocity and the CEO, who is revealed to be Peter Parker, were vulnerable, they were knocked into the gateway together simultaneously, resetting the timeline. This absolute monstrosity is able to teleport through time and space, in addition to all of his other powers. So yeah, Atrocity for sure needs to make a comeback. I want to see this guy. He only appeared once. He's probably one of the most horrifying looking villains of all time. Please. And at 8, Mr. Negative. Martin Lee was a seemingly good-willed philanthropist who ran a volunteer soup kitchen called Feast, where May Parker volunteered, because of course she did. While he was also the crime boss of Chinatown, Mr. Negative. Despite being a crime lord, Lee was seemingly a kind and generous man. The Feast project displayed healing powers for people of various illnesses, although the cause of this healing was actually unknown, but it turned out to be Lee himself. The public knows that the person known as Martin Lee was an illegal Chinese immigrant who attempted to travel to America to be with his wife. In China, he ran a factory, but because of his lack of resources to bribe the Communist Party, he could not develop his business and grew tired of that country. Although this Martin Lee is not actually Martin Lee, but a former smuggler who just used Lee's identity after he died. Mr. Negative first came into conflict with Spider-Man when he made a power play towards taking control of New York's criminal underworld by attempting to wipe out all existing members of the Kernali and Maggia crime families, using a DNA-specific bioweapon called Devil's Breath. Mr. Negative is also responsible for the creation of Anti-Venom, and while he was featured in the 2018 Spider-Man game, it's been like 3 years, so he needs to show up again. And at 7, The Spot. As a scientist working for the Kingpin, Dr. Owen was assigned to reproduce the radiation levels of the Vigilante cloak to find a way to artificially mimic his powers. Working late one night, he actually succeeded, creating a solid black circular portal. In doing so, however, the drain on the city's power became so great a blackout washed over the city, causing the portal to shimmer and destabilize. Fearful of losing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Owen stepped into it, which was a horrible idea. The power shortage caused the portal to send him into a different dimension, a place of half darkness and half light, kinda like my mind. When Owen emerged back in his lab, his body had undergone a radical transformation. The portals from the other dimension had adhered to his skin, covering him from head to toe in black spots. But just think about how crazy OP this villain is, alright? He has the ability to control these portals. Like, if the man wanted to decapitate you, instantly he could. Best doctor in a sense, I guess. That's still horrifying. The Spider-Man in the 90s cartoon would use these portals against Ohm, but if he had just decided that he wanted to just destroy him, he could have. And Spider-Man would have had nothing to do. So, yeah, I want to see him make an appearance again, somehow. And at 6, Spider-Side. Spider-Side is a more obscure and odd Spider-Man villain, but I still think he would be pretty badass. Being first introduced as Spider-Side in New Warriors number 61, this version of Peter Parker is one of the clones made by Dr. Miles Warren, because we all know how much we love clones, which is an entirely separate villain that caused the whole clone debacle and creation of Scarlet Spider and a whole lot of other things. What's notable about Spider-Side, however, is not only him having all of Spider-Man's powers, but also the ability to stretch and warp his body at will, similar to Mr. Fantastic. Spider-Side is certainly deadly as well, helping Jackal to release a virus in Springfield, Pennsylvania, resulting in the deaths of 2,600 people. But either way, Spider-Side, with all the abilities of Spider-Man and Mr. Fantastic, makes him pretty damn powerful, so I want to see him come back. They didn't do much with him, okay? And I like the name Spider-Side. Any evil Spider-Man, really, just bring me more. Halfway through into number 5, Red Goblin. After the collapse of S.H.I.E.L.D., the Carnage symbiote was secured in the Lockbox, a privately run vault at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Agents Crane and Coleman infiltrated the Lockbox and stole the symbiote, delivering it to their employer, Norman Osborn. Yeah, you see where this is going. After receiving the symbiote, Osborn bonded with it to become the new Carnage, hoping that it would be the key to regaining his Green Goblin persona. While the symbiote initially seized control of him, Norman offered to teach it more nuanced and sadistic ways to kill, an offer that the symbiote eagerly accepted. The fact that you know more sadistic ways to kill people than a freaking mad symbiote is a whole other topic though, dude. The symbiote turned over control to its new host, restoring his appearance and purging his body of the nanites, preventing him from augmenting himself with Goblin formula. Osborn used the symbiote to kill Phil Urich, and after pretending to be mortally wounded in a rematch against Spider-Man as the Green Goblin, unveiled his new partner by transforming into the monstrous Red Goblin. Osborn used the symbiote to great effect, incapacitating Spider-Man's allies and loved ones, and bonding a portion of the symbiote to his grandson to turn him into the new Goblin child. Spidey was only able to defeat Red Goblin by taunting Osborn, saying that killing him would only give Carnage the credit and not him, which caused Osborn to remove the symbiote from himself. So he couldn't defeat Red Goblin, he had to defeat Osborn. Yeah, this is one of my favorite Carnage versions, so I want to see this come back, please. Like the next Venom movie. Or a No Way Home. In at number 4, Demogoblin. After losing fights with Spider-Man and the Green Goblin, Jason Philip Macendale Jr., aka Hobgoblin, took advantage of the Inferno Crisis by following several demons back to their lair and confronting their demonic lord Natshir. Macendale wanted enough power to defeat his enemies, and offered his soul to the demon in exchange for such power. When the demon stopped laughing, he decided that Macendale's effort was worth something even if his soul wasn't, and he had him possessed. This gave Macendale the physical strength that he craved, coupled with superhuman speed and endurance. Unfortunately, I guess you could say, for him at least, the demon who possessed him proved to be incompatible, and the two fought many a battle for control over Macendale's physical form until the demon literally ripped himself out of his human host and began a separate existence as the Demogoblin, a form of anti-hero in a sense who would kill anyone who has sinned, which is basically everyone, except he would stay away from children, even dying to protect one. Getting close to the end in at number 3, Shocker. Okay, he's not really a forgotten villain, but Herman Schultz's parents died when his younger brother Marty was a boy. From a young age, Schultz turned to a life of crime, and soon realized that he wasn't really good at it, having been arrested several times. After one particular robbery gone wrong, Herman was arrested again, but was sent to the prison workshop, where he used the resources around him to build projects and build gauntlets that sent out shock waves which quickly opened safes as well, giving him a much needed one-up on the authorities. Now, I know what you're thinking, okay? Why am I talking about Shocker? Everyone knows who he is. Well, have you seen the MCU version of this guy? Okay, we need a better one. Come on, give me an actual Shocker. Shocker has the ability to shock his enemies with his handheld vibro shock units, but because the vibrations were so fierce, he has to wear a heavily insulated suit, which kind of looks like a mattress, but still. During his first outing as the self-styled Shocker, he ran into and defeated Spider-Man. Plus, I mean, he's the Shocker, I shock people. Give me a better version, okay? With a seemingly minute introduction into the MCU, I want to see a better version. Do it! Penultimately, in at number 2, the Swarm. Fritz von Meyer was once a fascist scientist, the details of which remain unrevealed. But von Meyer fled Germany at the end of World War II to settle in South America. A work expert on toxic poisons and apiculture, which is beekeeping, he continued his research on the breeding patterns of killer bees. One day, he found a hive unlike any other he had ever seen. The bees exhibited no fear and were unusually passive, and seemed to have a highly developed sense of intelligence. Believing that a nearby meteorite bombardment had somehow mutated these bees, von Meyer built a device that he hoped would reawaken the bees' killer instincts so that they could serve him. However, when they were no longer passive, they began to swarm all over von Meyer, killing him. In the midst of his death, though, his consciousness was shredded, dissipating into the swarms of bees. Thus, von Meyer became an aggregate being, like a living embodiment of the swarm, kind of like Spider's Man, but with bees. This is probably one of the weirdest but most fascinating villains I've ever seen, and certainly deserves a comeback. However, not as much as number 1, but I gotta admit, being named Fritz and then having your agony possess a whole load of bees, that's getting too close to FNAF for me, okay? I don't like it. Finally, in at number 1, Spider Carnage. We all knew this was going to be on the list, at least if you know me and my favorite Spider-Man villains. However, Spider Carnage isn't just a Spider-Man villain, he's an alternate version of Spider-Man. Hailing from one of the many Earths, this character was introduced in the 90s Spider-Man animated series, my favorite Spider-Man animated series, might I add. This Peter's life was actually very similar to the main Spider-Man, except this version also lost Aunt May and developed a resentment for humanity. And then he had to deal with a clone, which definitely sucked. Until he and the clone learned that the one who they thought was the clone, who was going by Ben Reilly at the time, could actually be the real Peter Parker, and that broke this Peter. A Carnage symbiote from another universe actually sensed this hatred and resentment, and through a portal created by Jonathan Ohm, it bonded with this Peter, driving him even more insane, and then started calling himself Spider Carnage. From my understanding, this character hasn't been seen since that final episode of the series, and I want him to make a comeback. Please, add this character to the MCU. Like, if we're getting 3 Spider-Man, why not just throw Carnage from some other universe in there too, and then have him bond with like Toby's, because apparently Toby's a bad person now. Even though I'm dressed like the Spider-Man 3 version, yes, that's exactly why I wore this suit today, specifically for that reason. But
starting us off in at number 10, Kang the Conqueror. Kang is by far one of the Avengers' most notorious villains, so much so that fans of the MCU have actually speculated he'll be the next big bad in future phases. Now in the comics though, he's almost destroyed Earth in an attempt to gain the power of Celestial. The time-traveling villain has had many different iterations over the years, as is the case when you're a character who has traveled to vastly different eras. But the reason why he's earned their respect came from his later years in the comics, when his teenage self became Iron Lad and led the Young Avengers. That version of Kang had an almost tragic story though. Well, actually pretty tragic, since he was forced to return to his own era knowing that he would become Kang the Conqueror, something he had to do in order to preserve the timeline and ultimately save his teammates. Oh, my heart is breaking. Up next, number 9, Ultron. In the comics, Ultron was created by Hank Pym as a defense protocol that he concocted that eventually exceeded Hank's own intelligence, and decided it had greater ambitions. Now for the past 5 decades, Ultron is a character that has kept the Avengers on their toes, and in the Age of Ultron story arc, an alternate future timeline, he actually defeated the team, and has taken over the planet, very different than the MCU one. Despite all of the crazy time travel shenanigans Ultron has caused the team to endure over the years, he's also responsible for the creation of Vision, and he's a character whose intelligence is something that several members on the team can at bare minimum respect. Even look to the MCU to see a similar result. Tony Stark, with the help of Bruce Banner, created Ultron in the movies, a robotic being whose intelligence and snark he can at least say matches his own, if not excels altogether. In at number 8, Hank Pym. Okay, hear us out on this one. Traditionally, Hank Pym is a superhero, but he's had moments where he's antagonized the Avengers and purposely put them in danger for his own means. And yes, while those moments happened under extreme duress and were the result of his poor state of mental health, technically speaking, you could still argue that his actions were villainous. When he was court-martialed from the Avengers, he concocted a plan to have one of his robotic creations attempt to kill the team, with him saving the day and therefore getting back in their good graces. Janet of course protested, and then he beat her. As you can imagine, his plans clearly backfired, and he was outed from the team altogether, but eventually joined up as an advisor with the West Coast Avengers, where he almost committed suicide. That being said, he's also a character that the Avengers saw needed help, eventually, and has managed to get back into their good graces. These days, Hank is a combination of himself and our previous number Ultron, an actual hybrid between the two, although it was revealed that the hybrid is kind of one-sided. It's more so Ultron wearing Hank as a skin suit. Yeah, the whole thing has us feeling a little unsettled too. In at 7, Cyclops.
Again, yes, we have a number that is technically a superhero, but has had a history of straying from the path of good into one where he let a bunch of teenagers become murderers. Just cuz. When Cyclops first hit the scene in the X-Men issue 1 in 1963, Scott Summers was the leader of said team, working under Charles Xavier to guide the team of mutants to successful victories on the battlefield and in missions. But over time, Scott changed. During the Schism story event, we saw a more villainous side of Cyclops emerge, and later during Avengers vs. X-Men, after Cyclops had started up his own team of X-Men on Utopia, and the Phoenix Force was all like, hey, I'm back on Earth, and using Hope Summers as a host, Cyclops found himself up against the Avengers. Now Captain America and the Avengers wanted to take Hope into custody to protect the Earth, fearing what the Phoenix Force may try to do. It does have a pretty bad track record. Cyclops, though, believed that Hope and the Phoenix Force could be used to jumpstart the mutant population. Major conflict ensues, and Scott only got darker from there. Needless to say, despite being arrested and ending up in prison and still having pretty messed up ideologies, he's cooperative with the Avengers and even lets Iron Man study him for remaining effects of the Phoenix Force. Now these days he's trying to get back on track as a good guy. But at least before he lost his crap, he was a respectable leader for mutants to look up to, and for a long time, that was something the Avengers respected as well. And at 6, Nebula. Nebula is a character in both the comics and the cinematic adaptations that has managed to earn the respect of Avengers members. More so in the MCU if we're being honest. Let's look at the comics though. Thanos, who is her grandfather in the comics, was pissed off that Nebula claimed kinship to him, and proceeded to almost kill her after he got all the Infinity Gems, transforming her into a corpse-like figure, always almost on the verge of death but never actually dying, but not truly alive either. He was like really proud of that. Actually, Thanos, no. She remained maimed and disfigured, but when Thanos defeated Eternity and his consciousness expanded into the universe, she took advantage of his comatose body and stole the gauntlet from him. She reversed what he had done and banished him. Now while she wanted to use it to take over the universe, you gotta give it to her. Managing to do what no one else could is a pretty big feat, and something to respect. And in the MCU, she's a villain turned hero, aiding after Thanos' snap, or as the MCU now refers to it, the blip, and helping the Avengers to return the world the way it was, and to finally defeat her adoptive father once and for all, despite her being the unintentional reason why the 2014 timeline Thanos was able to head on over to the present timeline, stir up a massive battle, and eventually, indirectly, cause the death of Tony Stark. We can't blame her for that. In at 5, Adam Warlock. Adam Warlock has done a lot for the Marvel Universe. He's the one who spearheaded the attack on Thanos in the 1991 Infinity Gauntlet story arc. The comic that, if you didn't catch it from our last number, was the primary basis for the MCU's Avengers Infinity War film. Warlock is the one who orchestrates the attack on Thanos after he's snapped, managing not only to recruit heroes, but cosmic entities and even Celestials. And Dr. Doom, who's like really reluctant and doesn't trust him. Actually pretty funny. Eventually, after Nebula grabs the gauntlet from Thanos, Warlock manages to convince the Mad Titan to help him get it back, and ultimately saves the day. That's without even getting into the sequel miniseries, of course. But here's the thing with Adam Warlock. While he's highly respected in the Marvel Universe, especially by the Avengers, he's also got an evil half, the Magus. There's been 3 incarnations of the Magus over the years, with the second version being one that is expelled from Adam's soul after he acquires the Infinity Gauntlet. That evil part of his soul becomes the corporeal form of the Magus, and ends up seeking out the gauntlet for himself. He even recently appeared in the Infinity War storyline as well. You know, that recent one where all the heroes got like smucked together. He was found by Gamora in a cocoon. By smucked I mean amalgamated. You get it, schmuck. And at 4, Norman Osborn. Norman Osborn is definitely a really bad dude, but the reason why he's respected by the likes of the Avengers, not including Spider-Man to be fair, is that in recent years he's fluctuated between being a baddie and being an anti-hero. But let's jump back for a sec. In contemporary comics, he went from being Peter Parker's arch-nemesis to a full-blown Avengers enemy, taking on the guise of the Iron Patriot in the process. He was once the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hammer, and even started up a team called the Dark Avengers. And that, my friends, is exactly why he ended up on our list. Aside from his intelligence and business savvy, which, you know, the likes of Tony Stark can at least nod to, Osborn was once respected by a group of Avengers. Technically, the Dark Avengers, which just so happened to be his very own team of Avengers, but it still counts, right? Technically Avengers. And at 3, Scarlet Witch. Scarlet Witch's origins in the comics established her as a villain before she became a part of the second iteration of Avengers. She and her brother Pietro initially joined up with Magneto, prior to knowing that he was Daddy Dearest, might I add, and joined his Brotherhood of Evil Mutants in order to repay him for saving them from a mob. Eventually, after Magneto is abducted by the cosmic entity Stranger, the Brotherhood disassembles, and the two, feeling that their debt has been paid, end up moving on and becoming Avengers. But let's talk about the real reasons why she's on this list. She may be a hero, but her mental instability in the comics is caused her to turn her back against her peers in catastrophic ways. During Avengers Disassembled, she discovers from a mildly intoxicated Wasp that she had children with Vision once upon a time, 2 twins, and that information was hidden from her for years. Naturally, she loses it, as any person would if they found that out, except she has reality-altering abilities, which makes this bad. She resurrects villain Jack of Hearts to kill the Avengers, blowing up the Avengers mansion, and then murders Scott Lang through the explosion. She forces Vision to crash the Quinjet into the mansion and then makes him cough up pieces of himself that turn into little Ultrons, and then She-Hulk ends up ripping him in half, killing him in order to prevent more Ultrons. Wanda then uses her abilities to summon Kree warships, which then causes Hawkeye's death. And then later on, Quicksilver would manipulate her to create a world where mutants were the dominant race and Avengers didn't exist. So all in all, when Girl has a grudge, she goes hard on dishing out revenge. At the end of the day though, she is still an Avenger and a hero. So despite all this, she does have the respect of some of the members of the team, or at least the ones that she hasn't killed in the past. Moving on to number 2, Dr. Doom. Dr. Doom fits the classic villain trope of villain with a point. Now, despite all of his personality flaws, he genuinely wants the world to be the best it can be, which of course to him means he needs to be the one ruling it. Funny enough, in an alternate reality in which he does rule, it's actually the best possible outcome, despite all of the evil things that he's done. Regardless of that, Doom's behavior is dictated by strict codes he chooses to follow. Doom has been known to keep his exact word and has a code of honor. The latter led him to save Captain America from drowning because Cap had previously saved his life. He also kept Spider-Man alive once after the hero had saved him from terrorists attacking him at an airport. He also won't attack a foe who's weakened or at a severe disadvantage, since he believes a victory in that state is hollow and meaningless. In addition to that, his magical skills have gotten him the respect of characters like Doctor Strange, who once admitted that Doom had the chops to be Sorcerer Supreme. All in all, he's a narcissist, but you know, there's some good in there. Such a complex character. And finally, in at number 1, Loki. For starters, Loki is the OG Avengers villain, the very first, and the reason the Avengers were brought together, technically speaking. In the first Avengers comic, Thor ends up needing some assistance with his dastardly brother, so he ends up working with the Hulk, Ant-Man the Wasp, and Iron Man to take on his trickster god sibling. Now this is before Cap was defrosted from his block of ice. In the process, Loki uses the Hulk to fight against them. For years he's been causing trouble for the Avengers, but he's also earned the respect of many of their members. Take Spider-Man for example. After the web-slinger helped him out, he gave Parker a favor that later, the hero cashed in to help save an innocent civilian. Parker even promised to put in a good word for Loki to other members of the superhero community. Aww. Loki has become more of an anti-hero in recent times, and despite sometimes still having his own best interests at heart, he's turned a leaf, something that several Avengers members have grown to respect. And do we even need to bring up the MCU Loki? Loki is one of the most beloved villains to appear up on the big screen, and even managed to work his way back into the hearts of our heroes, helping his brother Thor out in a big way during Thor Ragnarok. And now he's getting his own show, so that's dope.
In a 10, shocker. Herman Schultz's parents died when his younger brother Marty was a boy. From a young age, Schultz turned to a life of crime. However, he soon realized that he wasn't really good at it, having been arrested several times. After one robbery gone wrong, he got arrested again, but was sent to a prison workshop, where he used the resources around him to build gauntlets that sent out shock waves which quickly opened safes as well, giving himself a one-up on the authorities, a much needed one. Now I know what you're thinking, but how could a guy named Herman be any form of powerful? Well, the Shocker had the ability to shock his enemies with his handheld vibro shock units. But because the vibrations were so fierce, he wore a heavily insulated suit, and during his first outing as the self-styled Shocker, he ran into and defeated Spider-Man. Plus, I mean, he's the Shocker. He shocks people. In at 9, Hydro Man. Morris Bench was born and raised in the Bronx, New York. He began working as a crewman on a cargo ship, but he was accidentally knocked overboard by Spider-Man while a powerful experimental generator was being lowered into the ocean for testing. Exposed to the energy conversion process of the generator while being bombarded with volcanic gas, Bench's cellular structure was altered. When he was rescued from the depths though, his body began extruding great quantities of some watery substance, which Bench first attributed to just being sweat. Annoyed by the incessant dripping, Bench went to a local pub to stir up trouble, finding none, but he was astonished to learn that he could convert his entire physical form into basically water. While he may just be a form of Sandman being able to convert to water instead of sand, he certainly seems more powerful to me. There is water basically everywhere, and our bodies are made of 70% water, so if Bench was able to tap into the water that is in his enemies' bodies, that would be a freaking nightmare. not to mention a horrible sight. And it ate the Kingpin. A crime boss is one thing. A crime boss that to the public is a well-respected philanthropist and businessman is something else. Especially a businessman who is like 300 pounds of muscle. Wilson Fisk is an absolute madman who runs most of the New York and Las Vegas criminal underworld. However, things get even more intense after his wife is killed so that he doesn't retire. After the murder of his wife, not only did he resume leadership of his former organization, but he also turned over the files on other criminal leaders to law enforcement through the costumed crime fighter of Daredevil, now with the motive of ridding himself of any rivals, and the ploy actually worked, and as a result of the evidence in the files, many crime leaders, both inside and outside the Magia, were convicted. In the ensuing power vacuum, the Kingpin rebuilt his coalition stronger than before. He moved on to control a great majority of non-Magia East Coast gangs dealing in conventional crimes, and the Kingpin's organization became stronger than any single Magia family in the New York area could ever withstand. We love a savvy businessman. And at 7, Spider-Side. Spider-Side is a more obscure and odd Spider-Man villain that I still think would give the hero a run for his money nowadays. Being first introduced as Spider-Side in New Warriors number 61, this version of Peter Parker is one of the clones made by Dr. Miles Warren, an entirely separate villain that caused the whole clone debacle and the introduction of Ben Reilly and the Scarlet Spider. But what's notable about Spider-Side is not only him having all of Spider-Man's powers, but also the ability to stretch and warp his body at will, similar to Mr. Fantastic. Spider-Side is certainly deadly as well, helping Jackal to release a virus in Springfield, Pennsylvania, which resulted in the deaths of over 2,600 people, which Homer Simpson was definitely not happy about. But either way, Spider-Side with all the abilities of Spider-Man and Mr. Fantastic makes him pretty damn powerful for a villain that not really many people know about. And at 6, Kraven the Hunter. Karanoff found that he had a great talent for finding employment in Kenya, Africa. Karanoff began his career using the typical tools of the hunter, but over time he developed a preference to take down large animals with his bare hands. So, you know, already a psycho in the making. After meeting a voodoo witch doctor named Calypso, Karanoff took a herbal potion which enhanced his physical powers and gave him strength, speed, and senses to match a jungle cat. The potion also extended his life greatly, keeping his health and vitality for years to come. At some point, the notion of big game hunting became a bore to the hunter, so his associate Chameleon, who was later revealed to be his half-brother, proposed to Kraven that he hunt Spider-Man, and thus gave Kraven a new purpose in life. Kraven gained additional powers by drinking more rare and exotic jungle elixirs given to him by his voodoo priestess lover Calypso. These elixirs gave him the strength and speed of a savage beast, and all the better to catch Spider-Man with, right? Despite being assisted by the Chameleon, his scheme failed and he was deported from the US, but he would definitely come back. Halfway through into number 5, Toxin. Born from Carnage as the 1000th symbiote in its lineage, Toxin was feared to be the strongest and most dangerous of their race by both Venom and Carnage. Shortly after being born, the symbiote united with police officer Pat Mulligan. Years later, the symbiote was removed from Mulligan by Blackheart, who beat Pat Mulligan to death in a gutter. With the help of Venom, Jack-o'-lantern took it to its boss, Crime Master. Crime Master, though, found the perfect host in Eddie Brock, who he forced to become Toxin's host. You know, Eddie Brock, the former host of Venom. After bonding with Eddie, Toxin took over its host and worked with the Savage Six, attacking its grandfather symbiote Venom. And with Toxin seemingly coming to the big screen in the future, being introduced in Let There Be Carnage, okay, well, Pat Mulligan was introduced, and then he had some like freaky thing happen with his eyes near the end of the movie, but still, it's very close to it. This guy is also just a freaking freak, okay? He can grow fangs and claws when he's angry. It just happens. It's not something that he thinks of, it just happens. Something that Venom and Carnage are unable to do. However, Toxin is also unable to be tracked by Venom or Carnage, as well as being immune to Spider-Man's spider sense. So this dude is hella off the radar, which only makes things freakier. And at 4, Anti-Venom. When Eddie Brock separated from the Venom symbiote, traces of it were still left in his body. Later though, suffering from cancer, Brock started working as a volunteer in the Feast Center. Martin Lee, the founder of Feast, and the alter ego of the supervillain Mr. Negative, used his powers to cure Eddie's cancer. But in the process, Lee accidentally infused the remnants of the symbiote in Eddie's bloodstream with his power, and fused them to his white blood cells, creating a new hybrid symbiote which manifested when the Venom symbiote attempted to leave its then current host Matt Gargan and and returned to Eddie. This new symbiote, dubbed Anti-Venom by Eddie, demonstrated tremendous healing powers and other powers that differ from the Venom symbiote, as well as having an inverted color scheme, or a negative color scheme, if you will, such as producing antibodies that can cure any known disease and removing any other impurities within a human body. Unlike other symbiotes though, this symbiote is completely mindless, and Eddie Brock is in full control of its actions. This symbiote was destroyed when it was used as the cure for the spider virus, which had turned various characters into human spider hybrids. However, it was remade as Agent Anti-Venom after Flash Thompson ended up getting soaked with anti-venom serum. That's a whole other story. Getting close to the end, and in number 3, Shathra. An inhabitant of the astral plane, Shathra is the spider wasp to Peter Parker's spider. She learned of Spider-Man when he strayed from the safe path during a visit to the astral plane to locate the interdimensional kidnapper known as the Shade. Shathra immediately realized Spider-Man's true nature and determined that he would make the perfect meal for her hungry young hatchlings. Great! First introduced in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2 number 46 in 2002, Shathra quickly followed Spider-Man's scent back to Earth. She engaged Spider-Man in a battle that demonstrated her clearly superior speed and strength, but Spider-Man was able to use his superior knowledge of New York City to find temporary escape. But of course he only knew that it was a matter of time before Shathra would locate him once more. Shathra turned the game in a new direction though, changing to a human form and adopting the name Sharon Keller. And she went on TV to pose as Spider-Man's jitted lover. She went on TV and revealed a series of convincing and humiliating details, and of course this made Mary Jane upset. So, spurred on by Mary Jane's distress, Peter rose to the taunt. He gatecrashed the studio interview and attacked Sharon Keller in full view of, live TV. Shathra reverted to her Spider-Wasp form, but her gambit had achieved its goal of pushing Spider-Man to act on pure instinct, which ended up making him the prey, because they were at their actual primordial positions. He was the prey, she was the hunter because she's the Spider-Wasp. You get it, you get it. But ultimately, in at number 2, Chameleon. Being the first villain Spider-Man ever faced way back in Amazing Spider-Man number 1 from 1963 and my costume from yesterday, I think that Chameleon is a more underrated villain than he should be. Being able to look like anyone at any time is pretty damn overpowered, especially when you can use it to look like Spider-Man and even use suction cups to stick to walls, even if it's slightly unrealistic. This character is especially powerful when he has superpowers, like in the 90s animated Spider-Man series, where after Alistair Smythe infused him with a techno-organic virus, could simply look at you and end up transforming into you. It's actually insanely overpowered when you look at it like that, since he can also transform his clothes. He could be fleeing from Spider-Man and turn the corner and then be anyone, so it's certainly someone to fear, unless they use the original version who has to use disguises and makeup to look like anyone they want, since that process takes time and can't be turned on and off. And finally, in at number 1, the Spot. As a scientist working for the Kingpin, Dr. Owen was assigned to reproduce the radiation levels of the Vigilante cloak to find a way to artificially mimic his powers. Working late one night, he succeeded, creating a solid black circular portal. In doing so, however, the drain on the city's power became so great that a blackout washed over the city, causing the portal to shimmer and destabilize. Fearful of losing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Owen stepped into it, and the power shortage caused the portal to send him to a different dimension, a place of half darkness and half light. When Owen emerged back into his lab, his body had undergone a radical transformation. The portals from the other dimension had adhered to his skin, covering him with black spots from head to toe. The reason this is absolutely terrifying, and is the most overpowered villain you wouldn't expect, is because he now had the ability to control these portals. If the man wanted to decapitate you, he easily could. Just close a portal at any part of your body, and then boom, amputation, around your neck, you're dead. It's horrifying. Spider-Man in the 90s cartoon would use these portals to land a punch on Owen, but if Owen just decided to close it or he lost his focus to keep them open, that would have been real bad. Just stay away from this guy, straight up. Don't even try to fight him.
And at number 10, Taskmaster. Taskmaster's got some pretty neat abilities. After injecting himself with a Nazi-created primer, aka a modified adrenal steroid cortisol, his mind's procedural memory potential was unlocked, allowing him to absorb knowledge immediately. This extends to his muscle memory, meaning when he sees someone fight, he can mimic their moves, making him a rather difficult individual to battle since he can predict what other characters will do next in a fight. The only person who manages to evade this ability of Taskmaster's is Deadpool, due to the character being so darn unpredictable. In the comics, Taskmaster actually has defeated multiple Avenger characters, including Hank Pym's Yellow Jacket and the Wasp, and managed to fight both Iron Man and Captain America without completely getting his butt kicked. While it would be really darn unlucky if Taskmaster managed to defeat the whole team, he's still got a decent chance of throwing them off guard and getting the upper hand if coming at them unprepared, or if they fought him with no knowledge of his abilities. Although these days in the comics he's considerably less threatening, having joined the Secret Avengers despite having a history of being a sleeper agent. Moving on to number 9, Cyclops. Cyclops is one of the original X-Men members, meaning it's likely that in the future of the MCU, whenever the X-Men are introduced, we'll be seeing Scott Summers make an appearance, running with the good guys. But he isn't always good in the comics. During the Avengers vs. X-Men story event, Cyclops was a major threat to the Avengers, and like the main antagonist in that story arc. Subjectively speaking. In this story arc, Cyclops becomes possessed by the Phoenix Force, and he essentially conquers Earth, which forces the Avengers into hiding. Cyclops would eventually lose control of the Phoenix Force, becoming Dark Phoenix, and he would kill Charles Xavier. But he is later defeated by his daughter, Hope Summers, and Scarlet Witch. Not saying that we'll be seeing Scott's more nefarious side anytime soon, but it's something that once upon a time was a prominent threat. So who knows how things may pan out in the future. And at number 8, MODOK. MODOK is a villain that's existed in the comics since 1967, created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And in case you're wondering, his name stands for mental organism designed only for killing, or at least that's what he made his name stand for. The M also sometimes stands for mobile or mechanized, might I add. Anywho, he was initially an employee of AIM before they used him for an experiment, which turned him into MODOK, and he rebelled against them, taking over AIM in the process. He's not only got a superhuman intellect in that big ol' head of his, he's got psionic powers and the ability to calculate probabilities too. Here's the thing though, the likelihood that we'd ever see MODOK entering the live action MCU doesn't seem super viable. Recently the character was announced to be getting his own animated series on Disney's streaming service, and it seems to be an adaptation that will make the character more of an anti-hero rather than a flat-out villain. Plus, I don't think anyone ever wants to imagine the possibility of MODOK manipulating Carol Danvers into thinking he's a hot little piece that she can make out with. Yes, that actually happened in the comics. Moving on. In at 7, Dr. Doom. Victor Von Doom may not originate as an Avengers villain, but he's come into conflict with the team in the comics many a time, along with some of their members individually over the years. He's perhaps one of the most nerve-wracking villains thanks to his abilities. Victor is a scientist, a sorcerer, an inventor, and a polymath with a genius-level intellect. He can manipulate electricity, project and absorb energy, create protective shields, and can summon demons thanks to that sorcery. But perhaps his most defiant traits are his remarkably indomitable will and his code of honor. He once saved Captain America from drowning because Cap had saved his life in the past. He knows how to take advantage of a situation and can be cunning and manipulative when he needs to be. Combining technology and sorcery has made him quite deadly. Now that the rights for the character and the Fantastic Four are in the hands of Marvel Studios and Disney, I'm sure we'll eventually see Dr. Doom make an appearance in the MCU. Whether or not that'll have anything to do with the Avengers though, who knows? And at number 6, Thanos. Technically this is true. The first time around in Infinity War, Thanos defeated the Avengers and was successful in his plan to eliminate half of all living things in the universe. And then in the Prime timeline in Endgame, he used the stones to destroy the stones before Thor decapitated him. The second time around in Endgame, when 2014 Thanos showed up on the Prime timeline, he almost defeated them again if it weren't for Tony Stark sacrificing himself to kill off Thanos and his army once and for all. All of the spoilers in this number. Needless to say, if another timeline's Thanos popped into the Prime timeline again, we know that the Mad Titan would be one hell of a threat for the Avengers, with or without the Infinity Stones in his possession. And at number 5, Magus. Who's worse than Thanos? Well, how about the guy who ends up wielding the gauntlet in the comics after Thanos fails? Rather, the guy's evil self. We're talking about Adam Warlock's less ethical other half, Magus. So for context, during Warlock's cosmic travels, he comes across the Universal Church of Truth and their god, a fellow named Magus. Turns out that Magus is himself from the future, a corrupted version who occasionally pops up to screw with Adam. Magus believes that the concepts of good and evil are tools that allow one to change sentient beings, and craves all to worship him. And if they don't, he'll just kill them. What about his powers? Well, he's got cosmic awareness, he's a shapeshifter, he can summon the in-betweener, he can manipulate energy, absorb a being's life force, he uses quantum magic, can manipulate time and transmute reality, is psionic, and of course possesses superhuman strength and all that jazz. Overall, he's incredibly deadly. I think I'd probably prefer to stick to Adam Warlock instead. In at 4, Sentry aka Void. Sentry aka Robert Reynolds may have only been introduced into the Marvel Universe back in 2000, but he's definitely not a threat to take lightly. He was granted his powers from a super soldier serum that moves his molecules an instant ahead of the current timeline, although in the Age of Sentry miniseries it's implied that he's actually a refugee sentient life force from another universe. He's a little like Superman to an extent, but said to be omnipotent, who generally holds back his full might. When he was first introduced though, Robert was a depressed chubby dude who started remembering a different past, which unravels the truth, that he existed in the Marvel Universe all along, but everyone's memories have been altered to forget him entirely. This is because Robert was trying to suppress Void, an entity within him who has all the same powers as Sentry does. He can shapeshift, control weather, and create something called Infinity Trundles too, which attacks one's mind in traumatic ways. He's gone toe-to-toe with some of the most powerful beings in the Marvel Universe as well. Needless to say, you can imagine why the Avengers would prefer Sentry over Void. Moving on to number 3, Mephisto. Mephisto is literally Marvel's version of the devil. He's based on Mephistopheles, the demon from the Foss legend, and first appeared back in the Silver Age in 1968 in The Silver Surfer issue 3. Written by Stan Lee, the character would be a tempter who offered the Silver Surfer the world, dangling his off-limits long-distance lover in front of him too. All things that the Surfer rejected thanks to his goodness and nobility, but thus started a pattern with the character in the comics. He's constantly used as a vehicle for temptation, making deals with the devil, and he's always a character ready to take advantage of a situation. Hell, he even hung out with Thanos while the Mad Titan had the Infinity Stones in the 1991 Infinity Gauntlet series, knowing that the Mad Titan was emotionally unstable. So what makes him deadly? Well, he's an immortal entity with magical powers, capable of a whole lot. He can alter time, alter memories, project illusions, shape and size shift, has superhuman strength and durability. And if his physical form is destroyed, he can regenerate and reform in his home domain. So why make deals with characters? Well, Mephisto cannot subjugate the will of another without their permission, which is why he manipulates them through pacts. So you can see how something like that could get real tricky for the Avengers of the MCU. The closest we've ever gone to that kind of deep-rooted manipulation was likely in Age of Ultron, when Scarlet Witch manipulated their minds. And well, that kinda screwed a few of them up for a little while, so Mephisto could be an issue. In at 2, Galactus. Next to Thanos, Galactus is one of the biggest bads to ever find himself in the panels of Marvel Comics. But here's the thing about Galactus. He's not evil per se. Rather, the reason Galactus does what he does best, going around and devouring planets, is because he's fulfilling his hunger. He's essential to the balance of the universe. Guess no one filled Thanos in on that, did they? In the MCU, that is. Yet in the comics, Galactus has been a major threat of the planets, having decided on Earth as a planet suitable for his consumption. So, needless to say, he would be a gigantic threat for the Avengers if he ever did come their way. And finally, in at number 1, Korvac. Korvac first appeared in 1975 in Giant Size Defenders issue 3, created by Jim Starlin, who also created Thanos, and Steve Gerber. Initially, Korvac was meant to be a throwaway character, a dude named Michael Korvac who hailed from Earth 691 and went through some serious crap. He was a computer technician who, after the alien Brotherhood of Badoon invaded his planet, was punished by them when falling asleep at work, turning his upper body into a machine, essentially making him a cyborg. He's used by the Grandmaster as a pawn in battling Doctor Strange and the Defenders, but after an encounter with the Guardians and Thor, he became a real threat. Enter the Korvac saga. Korvac fled his universe and came to Earth 616, where he stumbles upon Galactus' space station and decides to download Galactus' knowledge into his own body. This causes him to be imbued with the power cosmic, essentially becoming a god, and he decides to reshape Earth into a utopia. Elders of the universe begin to sense his existence. The Collector, in an act of protection, decides to remake his own daughter, Karina, into a powerful being to use as a weapon against him, but she and Korvac fall in love. Korvac is eventually found out by the heroes of Earth and is forced into battle, killing a ton of heroes in the process. And after defeating them all, what does he do? He commits suicide after sensing that Karina doubts him, and in the process restores the Avengers and Guardians to life before he dies. While the Korvac saga has been occasionally criticized for its storyline, you can't deny that he'd make an interesting villain for the Avengers to take on in the future of the MCU, especially now that there's all these alternate realities that are popping up and exist.